My name is Brandon White, and I used to get food from the McDonald's restaurant close to my house every day. A couple of months ago, I walked in to get something and was attended by a new female employee named Mary. She was middle-aged, had short brown hair, and was slightly overweight. While I waited for my order, she tried to get to know me, making small talk. I didn't mind at the time. She seemed nice, and there was nothing odd about our conversation. After giving me my sandwich, I left, not knowing that visiting McDonald's that day would lead to my biggest mistake ever. The next few days after meeting her weren't that different from the first. But as more days went by, I began to notice something strange about Mary. For starters, Mary was always the one taking my orders. This was unusual for McDonald's. To make things worse, the conversations she tried to have with me only became weirder and left me uncomfortable in most situations. She would say strange things like how I looked so sexy and tasty, and sometimes ask me questions that no employee should have been interested in. Everything about Mary's behavior was odd. She looked almost 10 years older than me and didn't strike me as that sort of person in any way. Eventually, I began visiting another McDonald's far away from my house, deciding against reporting Mary and getting her fired. A couple of weeks went by, and one day, I walked into the new McDonald's and saw Mary working at the counter. I was shocked and expected her to tell me if she was filling in for someone, but instead, Mary acted as if she'd never left the old McDonald's and didn't address the situation at all. She resumed her usual attempts at small talk and disturbing remarks, but I simply ignored everything she said, got my order, and left. I decided not to go to McDonald's for a while, and only had it when a few friends placed orders at their apartments. I didn't know if Mary still worked there, but I wasn't eager to find out. One afternoon, while walking home after getting groceries, someone suddenly bumped into me out of nowhere, and most of my groceries fell. I bent over to pick them up, and the woman who had bumped into me began apologizing as she joined me to pick up the groceries. When I looked up to thank her, I was shocked to see Mary standing in front of me. I remained in silence as my mind raced. Was this woman stalking me, or was this just a coincidence? After standing there in silence, Mary finally said, "Well, young man, I'm in a hurry, so sorry about that," and left, acting like she didn't know who I was. I brushed it off again as a coincidence and walked home. As I got home, I realized my house keys weren't on me, but I was in a hurry and figured I had probably left without them, so I quickly got my spare key from under the mat, dropped my groceries inside, and left to meet up with my colleagues. My coworkers and I spent a couple of hours getting drunk and playing games on our day off. I left and headed home, but as I opened my door, something about it felt different. That feeling you get when someone else has been in your home was everywhere, but I was wasted, and all I wanted to do was take a shower, so I quickly looked around and headed to the bathroom. Later that night, I was alone in my living room watching HBO when my phone rang. I was curious about who could be calling me so late at night, so I answered with a simple, "Hello?" There wasn't a voice on the other end, but I could hear someone breathing heavily for about a minute before finally hearing a whispery voice say, "Come upstairs." I ended the call immediately, assuming it was some kids playing a prank, but something about it felt off, and despite my efforts, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and how I felt someone was in my home earlier that day. About 3 minutes later, my phone rang again, and it was the same number. I simply ignored it and tried to focus on something else. That's when I heard a noise coming from upstairs. I quickly switched off the TV and decided to listen more closely to make sure I wasn't hearing things. Sure enough, I heard a loud noise from upstairs, followed by another, and soon enough, I could tell they were footsteps, and someone was actually in my home. I quickly grabbed my phone and called the police before heading to the kitchen and grabbing a knife. The house was silent for the next few minutes, so I began to walk up the stairs slowly to make sure there was actually an intruder. As I checked each room one after the other, I began to calm down and question if I heard anything at all. Eventually, there was only one room left to check, and as I opened the door to the guest room, I was filled with a feeling of relief as all I could see was an empty room. And the sense of relief I had just gotten was quickly overcome with fear. As out of the corner of my eye, I could see a figure standing behind the door. Before I could say anything, the person jumped on me, knocking the knife out of my hand and settling on top of me, pinning both my arms under her. In that moment, all I could feel was terror as Mary looked me dead in the eyes before proceeding to grab the knife I had dropped. Mary slowly brought her head closer to me and began to sniff me, like she was taking in deep breaths. My skin began to crawl, and I began to struggle to get free. But there was no use, as Mary was a lot heavier than I was. She eventually stopped sniffing me and proceeded to say, "Oh, I missed you so much, baby. But you've been avoiding me lately. You looked so tasty today. I had to see you. And well, now I have to take a little bite." She smiled and continued, "Now, it'll hurt a little, but I'm sure you don't mind, darling." Mary quickly brought down the knife on my hand, taking my pinky finger clean off. The pain shot through my body, and I couldn't help but let out a piercing scream. Blood began to spill everywhere, and Mary couldn't hold back her laugh as she threw my finger in her mouth and chewed it down until nothing remained. At that point, I had begun to close my eyes as I slowly lost consciousness from the pain. That's when Mary said, "No, baby, don't do that. I was just about to have one of your tastier parts." She then proceeded to hold my eyelids open as she lowered the knife slowly towards my eye. Before I could begin to plead with her, police sirens filled the air, and I was immediately filled with relief. Mary quickly got off me and pointed the knife at me, saying, "No. How did they find out, baby? You didn't call them, did you?" One look at the woman in front of me, and I could tell she was absolutely crazy. She began pacing the room and was visibly worried, so I decided it was better to play into her game than act out, as I already knew how far she was willing to go. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was you waiting for me, so I called them. Just let me go down there and send them away, and I'll be right back." Mary looked at me with what seemed to be relief, and I could tell she truly believed what I had just said. She replied, "All right, honey, be quick now," and lowered the knife, letting me leave. I bolted downstairs with one thing in mind: get as far away from Mary as I could. As I stepped out of the house, I was met by a group of officers. They asked if anyone else was in the house before storming in and exiting with Mary in the next few minutes. Mary was taken away in tears as she screamed at me for betraying her and not keeping my word, confirming to the police that she was completely crazy. In the last few days, I've been informed by the authorities that Mary is wanted in several states for multiple counts of rape, assault, and suspicion of cannibalism. I was lucky enough to be the only one of her victims to survive her ordeal. That encounter still keeps me up at night, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about the first time I met Mary in McDonald's. I hope my story has helped you all realize that we really know nothing about the people who serve us and our families at McDonald's. In my case, I met a crazy serial killer who posed as a happy-go-lucky woman, but in your case, it just might be the devil who hands you your Happy Meal with a smile on their face. Hello everyone. We are thrilled that you have been enjoying our videos. Your support means the world to us. If you've liked what you've seen, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. We would love to hear which one of our videos is your favorite. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 members in the SSG family, and with your help, we can achieve that goal. Thank you for being a part of our journey. Christmas is usually one of the best holidays of the year. The kids are always happy. There's food, parties, and presents. It's really that time of year when we can leave all our problems behind and concentrate on being happy, even if it's just for a day or two. The story I'm about to tell you was just before Christmas, in those days when we were getting ready for the holidays and it was all happy times. What neither I nor my children expected was that those moments of happiness would be interrupted because we had an appointment with the unknown. Something we didn't understand at the time and still don't today was stalking us. And you know what? It still is. If you don't know what you're up against, how can you defeat it? It all started on a snowy day. During those days, we decided to take a mini vacation and went to my parents' country house. My wife was hesitant to go since we had a lot of work to do when we got back. But the kids were on vacation from school and insisted all year to go, so we indulged them. It was only a few days before Christmas. We had already put up the Christmas tree and decorated our house in town. But the cabin still lacked some Christmas spirit. We brought some decorations to beautify the cabin a bit, but to my surprise, my parents had left us something. A human-sized Santa Claus. It looked like an animatronic, but it was very strange. It was too thin. Normally, Santa Clauses are similar to the real Santa, fat with a huge smile. But there was something weird about this one. His look was tetrick. He looked like some Santa Claus out of some child's nightmares. I was about to put it away, but my kids saw it at the same time I did, and for some reason, they liked it. Kids really do have the weirdest tastes. Other than that, the day continued as normal. We spent the evening watching movies and eating something as a family. The kids seemed very entertained, and my wife and I were very happy about it. Nothing prepared us for what would happen the next day. After spending the night sleeping comfortably, a scream woke my wife and me at the same time. It was the scream of one of our children. As soon as we woke up, we both looked out the window where the scream was coming from. My two children were outside, running through the snow, running away from someone. When I looked back a little further, I clearly saw their attacker. No, it couldn't be true. It was the Santa Claus animatronics I had put up yesterday. This didn't make any sense. As I watched him run in the direction of my children, I could see him walk very naturally. This was not an animatronic or anything like that. It moved like a human, but it was so thin, who could fit into that costume? I told my wife to call the police as soon as possible while I went to get our children and protect them from their attacker. At that point, I didn't care about bundling up or getting a gun. I had to go as soon as possible. As soon as I got out, I did not go in the direction of my children, but towards my attacker, who for some reason was not running, but only walking in the direction of my children. I don't know what this being was or why it was attacking my children, but I knew I had to do something to stop it. With all my strength, I threw myself at him. I still thought that all this must have some explanation. Maybe it was a person disguised as a Santa. Yes, that must be it. That was the only logical explanation. A little confident from the lie I fed myself, I tried to take him down, but that's when despair and desolation took over my whole body. When I was just a few inches away from him, about to knock him down, I was overcome with a horrible feeling of fear and sadness that prevented me from moving forward. Defeated and crying, I fell to the ground, clutching my chest from the pain I felt. This was not the pain of a physical attack. It was not the pain of an illness. It was the pain one feels when one is very nervous or sad. Santa simply ignored me and kept walking in the direction of my children. Whatever it was, he was aware of what was happening to me. Possibly in some way, he caused it, since he didn't flinch an inch from my attack, knowing what was going to happen. After a few seconds that felt like hours, I gathered all my strength to get up and follow him. The pain and sadness I felt at that moment was so great that even though it faded as soon as Santa left, it still haunted me. For me, I would have stayed on the ground surrounded by ice crying, but I couldn't afford the luxury. That being was after my children, and I wouldn't let them feel for a second what I felt at that moment, or worse. I got up and ran as fast as I could through the ice. My children and Santa were already far away in the forest, but the sound of their screams guided me on the right path. With every centimeter I ran, I could feel that horrible feeling taking over my body again. The pain in my chest was getting bigger and bigger. I couldn't be far away. The screams became closer than ever until, crying against a tree, I found my two children. In front of them, the strange figure walked slowly in their direction. As soon as I saw this image, I turned to Santa Claus. You would think that nothing had changed from the last time I did it and ended up on the ice crying, but for me, everything had changed. This time, I was watching as the strange being was about to attack my children, and at that moment, I didn't care about anything but protecting them. I ignored the pain, the fear, the sadness, the cold. All I could see was this thing approaching my children. With a war cry, I lunged at it and knocked it to the ice. Blinded by rage, I didn't realize what was really going on. I was just hitting an empty Santa Claus doll. All the feeling of fear and desperation had vanished the moment I made contact with them. Now I was doing nothing more than hitting an inanimate object while my children cried beside me. When I realized this, I stepped aside and went to hug my children while Santa stood destroyed next to us. It was all over. Once we got back, I threw all the parts of that Santa Claus in the trash and put a new one once we got home. I'll be honest with you, the new Santa Claus didn't last more than 2 days. Maybe I was still a little paranoid, but I could swear that every once in a while, it felt like it wasn't in the same position I left it in. As if his head or limbs were moving when no one was watching. Also, I couldn't shake this feeling. This feeling of paranoia that when I was near him, I was constantly being watched. For their part, my children didn't talk about it, but I could see in their eyes that they were terrified. At first, my wife thought everything I told her was a joke. But over time, she began to believe us. Although part of her thinks it's a strange collective paranoia. I can't blame her, and I can't blame you if you don't believe me. Not even in my wildest nightmares could I think something like this could happen. But I guess, as a human, there are things we can never understand. And you know what? It's okay. I don't want to understand what happened that day. I just don't want it to happen again. I just want my family to be safe.
Working at Burger King was an average job for a guy like me. Often the nights were quiet, with only a handful of customers coming in for a quick dinner before closing. But on that particular night, the story I'm about to tell you was anything but ordinary. I was alone on the night shift, as usual, and the clock read 10 p.m. when it all started. The night was cold and dark, and the rain was pounding on the windows of the restaurant, creating a gloomy atmosphere. I had finished cleaning the tables and was about to close when I saw a lone man standing outside in the pouring rain. He wore a black jacket and a hat that hid half his face, but something about his posture sent a shiver down my spine. I still couldn't refuse entry to a customer, so I opened the door for him. The man walked in without saying a word, just staring at me with his cold, dark eyes. He ordered a hamburger and a soda, and I prepared his order. The atmosphere in the restaurant was strange, as if silence and tension had taken over the place. As I delivered his food, I tried to make friendly conversation, but the man didn't respond. He just kept staring at me. Something in his gaze made me uneasy, but I decided not to pay much attention to it. The man sat in a corner of the restaurant, alone, silent. I continued with my usual tasks, but I couldn't help but feel watched. A few minutes passed, and I noticed that the man didn't touch his food. He just sat there, looking at me. I felt uncomfortable, as if I were in a scene from a horror movie. Finally, I decided to approach him and ask if everything was okay. I walked up to his table and spoke to him. "Is everything all right, sir?" The man looked up, but instead of answering, he smiled in a disturbing way. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and his teeth looked sharp as knives. At that moment, I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't just let it go. The man finally spoke, and his voice was soft and creepy. "I like your restaurant. It's a good place to be alone." I didn't know what to answer, so I just nodded and walked away from his table. I walked back to the counter, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that came over me. The night was slowly progressing, and the man was still sitting in his corner, not touching his food. I decided to call the manager and tell him what was going on, but the call was mysteriously cut off before I could say a word. I felt like I was trapped in a silent nightmare. I decided to take a break and headed for the bathroom. I needed a moment to regain my composure. While I was in the bathroom, I heard footsteps outside. As I came out, I saw the man walking around the restaurant, looking at everything as if he were inspecting every nook and cranny. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden in the bathroom forever. When I returned to the counter, the man approached and finally broke his silence. "You have an interesting place here. I like it a lot." His words were unsettling, and his gaze kept boring a hole into me. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply said, "Thank you," trying to remain calm. The clock struck midnight and the man still wouldn't touch his food. At that moment, I realized I couldn't let this continue. I asked him if he needed anything else, if he was satisfied with his dinner. "I need you to show me the kitchen." My heart began to pound. I was not allowed to show customers the kitchen, and something about the way he was asking made me even more uneasy. I politely explained that I couldn't do that it was against restaurant policy. But the man was unfazed. He simply got up from his chair and started walking towards the kitchen. I reacted as quickly as I could and started to press the panic button behind the counter, but I didn't know if it was working. The button didn't react and didn't make any sound. Who knows? Maybe it didn't work months ago. Maybe it never worked. Terrified, I made a really bad decision. Driven by pure fear combined with my survival instinct, I ran after him, trying to stop him. I begged him not to come in, but he wouldn't listen. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped and started looking around, as if he was looking for something. I felt trapped between my duty to protect the restaurant and the fear that was gripping me. The man walked over to one of the meat cleavers we had in the kitchen and picked it up. At that moment, I knew I had to do something. I grabbed a frying pan and prepared to defend myself, even though it was clear I was at a disadvantage.
"Do you know what silence is, kid?" "Silence can be scary, right?"
The man advanced towards me, his blade held high. I prepared to defend myself with the frying pan, but it was useless. Laughing, he pulled the pan out of my hand as if I were a child playing with something dangerous. Like a cornered animal, I fell to the ground crying, accepting my fate, aware that I couldn't do anything to defend myself against this man. In retrospect, I could have tried to run. I could have thrown myself at him. Anything would have been better than just giving up like that. But you know, it really is impossible to act logically in that situation. All I could think of was that a few hours earlier I was at home, getting dressed for a boring workday, thinking about what to eat when I get home. Suddenly, it was all over. Now I was condemned to death by a man I didn't know. His motives were totally unknown. I was just simply going to be the victim of a sick man who was going to kill me for fun. As if knowing what I was thinking and how defeated I felt, the man left the knife on the table and began to rub his hands across my neck, enjoying every second in which I couldn't defend myself. At that moment, I realized something even more terrible. The knife was just to scare me more, but he never intended to use it. I mean, he didn't need to. He just wanted to torture me, to make my death last as long as possible. I could see in his face, in his sick and twisted eyes, how he was going to enjoy what he was about to do to me. Slowly, the man put his hands on my neck. I could feel the veins in his hands getting more and more pronounced, while very slowly his hands applied pressure to my neck. Little by little, I began to lose my breath. The force in his hands was getting stronger and stronger. What would happen first? Would I die of suffocation? Would my neck break? All I could think about was my family, my girlfriend, my pet. What were they doing right now? Could they have imagined that I was about to die? My vision started to get blurrier. I was fainting. But then, suddenly, the sound of police sirens became audible outside. The man stopped and listened. For a moment, the tension in the kitchen vanished. Police lights flashed outside and we heard the officers enter the restaurant. The officers approached the man and detained him. Apparently, the emergency button worked and alerted my boss, who saw on the cameras everything that was going on. The man was arrested and taken out of the restaurant in handcuffs. He didn't say a word as he was led away, but his cold stare and disturbing smile remained etched in my mind. After he was taken away, calm returned to the restaurant. My manager arrived soon after, concerned and relieved at the same time. I explained what had happened, and he thanked me for taking steps to protect the place. He assured me that the man would not cause trouble again, but I was no longer interested. I would never set foot in that Burger King again. Although the man was arrested, I never knew who he was or why he'd come to the restaurant that night. The experience left me with a lingering sense of unease and fear. The silence and the look of the psychopathic man stayed with me long after he was taken away. That night of terror at Burger King was an experience I'll never forget. I learned that sometimes evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, and that silence can be more terrifying than any scream. Since then, I never looked at a hamburger the same way again. And I always made sure the doors to my house were locked at night because I couldn't help but feel that sooner or later, that man would come back to my house to finish what he started.
The date was June 15th, 2014. My team and I had decided to finally investigate the old asylum that stood alone and abandoned in Williamsburg, Virginia. This particular abandoned asylum had been the talk of the town for many years prior, with multiple stories and myths, the most famous being about students who snuck in and were found days later completely silent and void of themselves. According to the locals, the government followed up by launching an investigation, sending officials to uncover what had happened, but their findings were so grave they decided to sweep the case under the rug, hiding all students, parents, and officials who entered the asylum. The case was eventually buried, and the asylum was completely sealed off as toxic and harmful. The history of the asylum, while it was functioning, was still unknown, and the details of the students who explored it after it was abandoned are also unknown. My name is Jacob Benedict, and these are the details of how my team and I uncovered the terrifying secrets of the Williamsburg Abandoned Asylum. My team consisted of 5 individuals, including me, and at the time, we'd only been paranormal investigators for about 3 years. In these 3 years of working cases and seeing all sorts of things, we had come to the conclusion that despite whatever stories were told, they were just stories, and there really was no such thing as ghosts, creatures, or things that go bump at night. In this particular case, we heard first about it in March 2014, and finally decided to make the trip to the asylum in June. We got to the town late that day, and didn't do much except lodge in our hotel and brief on the case. We were immediately struck by the inconsistencies and the lack of information about the asylum, which set this case apart from anything we had encountered in the past. It piqued our curiosity and fueled our determination to uncover its secrets. The next day, we headed into town and split up into 2 groups, with 3 of my colleagues heading to the library to try to find out more about the history of the asylum, while Jessica, another one of my colleagues, and I went around town asking locals for any information they had. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" I said as we approached a middle-aged lady in the street. She replied with,
"Yes, sure, but I'm in a hurry and I don't have much time."
"Yeah, no problem. It'll be quick. Can you provide us with any information on your town's old asylum?" I said. The expression on her face changed slightly before responding with,
"Well, I can't tell you much. If it has to do with that asylum, I know just as much as you."
Her response shocked me as I'd assumed a local would have a lot more information than we did. So I said, "Oh, I apologize. I had assumed since you lived here you'd know a lot more than I do."
"Well, I can see how you'd think that, but I'm sorry, I don't know much, and I don't think anyone you speak to would know much either. Ever since I moved here, I've understood that the asylum is something to stay far away from."
She paused for a minute before saying,
"Of course, there are still stories and ideas, but I'll tell you this for goodwill. Nothing good comes from that asylum. It's best you leave it alone."
Despite saying she knew nothing, something about this lady's warning felt real to me. I also noticed she mentioned she moved here, so I decided to ask, "So, before you leave, do you know if maybe there's anyone who grew up here and maybe knows something that could help us?" She looked annoyed but sluggishly replied,
"A lot of people grew up in this town, but the only one I can think of to help is Mary. Her family was involved somehow with the asylum, and she doesn't live that far."
After that, The lady kindly gave us directions to Mary's house, and in less than 10 minutes, we were standing at our front door. The house was extremely large and quiet, but it was obviously old, and I could tell just by looking at it that there hadn't been any repairs in years. We knocked, and in about 2 minutes, an elderly lady opened the door slightly.
Can I help you?
She said, standing behind the door. Yes, we're looking for Mary. We wanted to ask a few questions about the abandoned asylum, I replied. The woman remained silent for a while before reluctantly inviting us into the home. The house's interior was just as run down as its exterior, with the paint peeling off and its floors confirming to me that the house was extremely old. Mary showed us a couch and informed us to wait for her here as she went to get what she needed. She returned a few minutes later with a file completely covered in dust and told us everything there was to know about the abandoned asylum was in there. After a while of talking, we discovered Mary's grandfather was head of operations at the asylum while it was running, and he passed away shortly after it was closed. She explained the file was put together by an employee at the asylum during an investigation that eventually resulted in the closing of the asylum. The case was handled quietly, and the family obtained the file after the asylum was closed, keeping it to avoid any scandals or leaks. However, when the kids went missing, the police asked Mary's father for information, and again, the file was used quietly, and the government found its contents too problematic and swept the case under the rug. Mary appeared emotional talking about this. She proceeded to tell us she'd uncovered the contents of the file after her father's passing and had been burdened by the guilt of keeping it all hidden.
I wasn't going to help you at first, but you seem like good people. I think you will do the right thing with that file and bring light to the activities of what went down at that asylum.
Mary seemed to have confused us for a journalist or some sort, so I responded with, Mary, there seems to be a bit of confusion here. While we do find everything you've told us intriguing, we didn't come here to get the scoop on this. We're here because people believe the building's haunted, and there are various myths revolving around the asylum. We'd hoped you'd know a little bit about its history. Thankfully, you did. But we still need to visit the asylum and find out what's really going on. Maybe there's even some truth behind the myths. Mary's expression had completely changed now, and she looked almost pale as she said,
Whatever you do, do not visit that place. Just take the file and release the truth.
She paused before grabbing Jessica's arm and saying,
That asylum is no place for people like you. The devil lives there now. The devil and all his demons.
Jessica quickly pulled back her arm and got up before saying, Jacob, we should go. I think we have enough. Mary began to frantically look around, saying,
Don't go. Don't go.
I got up and thanked Mary before leaving with Jessica and heading to the asylum. Little did I know, that would be the biggest mistake we ever made. I think it was about an hour later, and my entire group was standing at the gates of the asylum. We had met up earlier to discuss what we had all discovered. The group that visited the library didn't find much, but they'd managed to find the blueprints of the asylum. We told them about our discussion with Mary and proceeded to look at the contents of the file together. The file contained all sorts of horrible tests and experiments that were done on the mental patients in the asylum. These experiments only led the patients to slowly lose more of themselves until they were eventually void. As time passed, patients began to die, and the asylum decided to bury the corpses on its grounds. What really began to worry the doctor, however, was the living patients who had already been losing themselves suddenly began to have regular conversations with their dead colleagues. They would be heard laughing hysterically and calling the names of the dead in the middle of the night. It didn't take long before the patients who hadn't been involved in the experiments began acting the same way, and eventually, the doctors. It was as if all those in the asylum began slowly losing themselves until they were completely void and could no longer function mentally. As we looked at the old asylum from outside its gates, it became increasingly obvious nothing good would come from walking through its doors. The asylum was a 3-story building, and it covered around 50 hectares of land. The building seemed way older than Mary's home, however, and its exterior had already begun deteriorating, adding to its already eerie look. I continued looking at the building when I suddenly saw a man staring at us from a window upstairs. That's when I said, "Hey, Who the hell is that? Pointing towards the window. Everyone immediately turned their attention to where I was pointing, but shockingly, there was absolutely no one there. Ha ha, very funny, Mason said, assuming I was playing a prank on them. I was stunned and concerned because I could have sworn I had seen someone at the window. Everyone played it off as a joke and began walking into the asylum. I followed behind and tried to focus on the task at hand, but all I could really think about was Mary's warning. I stepped into the asylum. I immediately felt the temperature go down drastically. The building was extremely cold, and although I could tell by looking at it that no one had been there in years, it didn't in any sense feel that way. It actually felt like I had walked onto a stage and had 1,000 eyes watching. We continued walking deeper into the asylum, looking for anything that would explain the paranormal stories that surrounded the building. The floors were still stained with blood, and the rooms were filled with chairs and beds with straps for the patients. The group had stayed together exploring the building when suddenly I followed them into a room, and I was alone. At that point, I'd assumed they were playing a prank on me. Guys, very funny. You've had your laugh, now let's move on and get out of here, I said, expecting a response. Instead, I was met with a deathly silence, and the temperature got even colder. I was completely scared and alone in the room when someone walked past. I immediately walked out to follow the person, but once again, there was no one there. At this point, I decided it was better to leave the asylum and wait outside for the others. I turned to leave, but I was met with the sight of a young woman in a gown and rotting flesh standing in front of me. My heart dropped at the sight of her, and she was so close to me that I could feel her extremely cold breath on my face. The lady only had one eye intact, while the other was being eaten by maggots and releasing a rancid smell. She slowly got closer and began to open her mouth. I closed my eyes and prepared for whatever was about to happen when I suddenly heard a scream from upstairs. I opened my eyes to see she was gone, and I immediately ran upstairs to see what had happened. I looked around upstairs for about 10 minutes before eventually finding Jessica sitting alone on the floor with her head in her hands. She appeared to be mumbling some words I couldn't understand, so I slowly approached her and said, "Hey Jess, are you okay? I don't know what's happening, but we need to leave right now. Come on." Jessica slowly raised her head and turned to me. She responded with, "But Jacob, we can't leave. We have to wait for the others so we can all go together." Jessica had messed up her hair in a way that had her face covered, and the room was so dark I could barely make out anything. But a part of me agreed with her, so I sat beside her and we waited. We had waited for almost 30 minutes in the dark and cold silence, so I figured it would have been a better idea to go look for the others instead. "Hey, do you remember where you lost the others? Maybe we can go find them and leave," I asked. However, I didn't get a response from Jessica. All I got was complete silence. I assumed she was probably just stressed out and didn't hear me, so I said, "Jess, we need to leave soon." This time, Jessica replied, once again lifting her head slowly to face me as she said, "Don't you get it though? We can't leave. You have to stay with us now. All of us. Together." As she faced me, her hair was out of her face, and my heart dropped as I came to the horrific realization that I hadn't found or been with Jessica at all. The woman began to slowly chuckle before bursting out into full laughter. Her laugh felt like needles piercing through my ear, and before I could react, the room was full of other patients, also partially decomposed. They all joined in with her laughter and began walking towards me. Their stench filled the room, and no matter where I looked, their faces would appear, some more filled with maggots than others. At this point, I was completely lost and could barely hear my own thoughts. My body soon began to join in on their laughter. I tried vigorously to fight and gather my thoughts, but all my body could do was laugh and laugh and laugh until I realized I had lost myself. "Sir, are you all right?" I opened my eyes slowly in response to the voice I had just heard. A part of me wondered if I was still in the asylum hallucinating, but as I regained consciousness, I looked around to see a bunch of paramedics attending to my group and me. The police were also on the scene questioning Mary, who had placed a call to inform them we were in danger after we visited her home. I stayed conscious for about 2 minutes more before blacking out and waking up 2 days later in Eastern State Hospital, Virginia. Somehow, I had regained total consciousness and was aware of my surroundings. The rest of them, however, weren't so lucky. They all appeared to be conscious, but weren't in any way responsive to what happened around them. The police informed me Mary had called them, and by the time they arrived, I was found laughing hysterically right behind the asylum's front door. This would mean I hadn't taken up to 11 steps in the asylum, and everything I'd experienced was all a part of the trance. The rest of my group, however, were found a long time later and had remained unresponsive. It's been 9 years since my experience with the asylum. Jessica and the rest of my group were placed in a different asylum. I have since given up on exploring all things paranormal, and I visit them regularly to remind myself what I experienced was real and not just a bad dream. Therapy has been helping, but I still see the patients in my nightmares, and every day I wish I had just listened to Mary's warning. I hope my experience has convinced you all that behind every myth, there is some truth. And it is only those who are suicidal that would doubt the existence of the paranormal.
The following story I'm about to tell you may seem unbelievable. I understand that it may pass as just another internet story. I also understand that even though there were witnesses, not everyone believes me, nor do my family or friends. I admit that even though I question if what I experienced is real, but I know it is. It is as real as the marks on my skin will attest. It all happened at my old job. I used to have a massage parlor in my garage, and to tell you the truth, I really liked it. I always enjoyed being a masseuse, and obviously I studied for it. I'm not going to lie to you. Every once in a while, I received some indecent proposal that honestly ruined my day. But luckily, it happened less and less, and once they got to know me, almost all my clients were regulars. Everything was going more than fine until one day. I got a surprise from one of the men who always came to me for massages. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Nothing made that day special. The weather was normal, not too hot nor too cold. Nothing had happened to me the day before, nor did I expect that day to be remarkable in any way. I simply got up, had breakfast, and went to work on a day when my agenda was composed of clients I already knew. The first few massages were normal, and I was getting ready for my next client, and that's when the nightmare began. Tim was always a normal man. He was a married man, and he never made any kind of proposition or innuendo to me. Tim had a small build. He was quite short and skinny, but I could tell he went to the gym from time to time. His personality was quite calm. He was a very polite, humble, and shy person. Needless to say, he also had a pretty low profile. I was getting ready to have a quiet session with him, but as soon as he walked in the door, I knew something was wrong. Tim was really very nervous. His face was red, and his relaxed posture was all tense, like he was really nervous about something. I greeted him politely, and he just gave me back a shy and forced smile. Something was happening to him. "Hey, Tim, sorry for the intrusion, but are you all right?"
Hi, Barbara. Yes, of course. I'm just a little tense.
Oh, I understand. Lie down. I'll do my best to make you better.
Tough week. I'd appreciate it. These last few days have been very tense.
Once Tim lay down, with his shirt off, I covered my mouth so I wouldn't scream from the shock of what I was seeing. His whole body was different. He had marks and cuts all over. But these were not marks from a fight, and he didn't look like he had been attacked. The marks were key points of his body. It was like his body had gotten bigger and his skin couldn't take it. His skin was cut like a t-shirt that he had outgrown at some point. It was all very strange. But you know what? It wasn't the worst of it. What struck me most about his back was his hair. Tim was always a very neat person. He was one of those people who hated having hair on his body. from facial hair to hair on his back to hair on his legs. The only thing he was naturally accepting of were his eyebrows and the hair on his head. That's why I was so shocked by seeing him the way I saw him. His whole body was full of hair. It was as if this man hadn't shaved for years. When was the last time I saw him? Last month? This didn't make any sense. Had he taken any medication that caused him to have an allergic reaction?
Is there something wrong with my body? What's taking you so long?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. I was just looking for the cream. I must admit that Tim's comment caught me totally off guard. He would never have spoken to me like that. Somewhat uncomfortable, I rubbed some cream on his back and started massaging him. Something was wrong with his back, and I don't mean the cuts or the farting. His back was moving on its own. I thought about telling him to stay still, but quickly realized that would not be possible. All these movements felt involuntary. It was as if something was happening to his back, as if it was changing.
No! Not now! Not again!
From one second to the next, Tim gave a great scream and began to move violently. Terrified, I just stepped back and dropped the cream. His body began to change rapidly. His muscles swelled, and Tim stopped to scratch violently all over his body. I didn't know how to react. I was alone in my house. Should I scream and alert the neighbors? Wouldn't that put me in even more danger? In the middle of everything that was happening, Tim looked at me with a lot of anger and walked slowly towards me, always scratching and with unpredictable and uncomfortable movements. Nervously, I grabbed a shovel and told him to back off. In response, he just pulled it out with one hand and threw it to the side. With some resistance, he grabbed my neck with his other hand and slowly began to squeeze me. I can't describe to you what I felt at that moment. I tried to resist. I tried to fight back. But this person was not the same shy man who always came to me for massages. Nothing I did, no struggle or attempt I made to escape seemed to have any effect on him. Make no mistake, I couldn't breathe and I was choking. But I felt that rather than drown, I would surely break my neck. I could feel my life slipping away from me as the man focused on trying to kill me. And just as it started out of nowhere, it ended. Instead of continuing to squeeze me until I ran out of air or broke my neck, he simply threw me violently against the wall. Tim threw me with such force that it was a miracle I didn't hit my head against the wall because the damage would have been irreversible. Trying to recover from the blow, I looked up and saw my attacker more furious than ever. He wasn't even focused on me anymore. He was just running all over the garage, destroying everything in his path, screaming desperately as if he was an animal that had totally lost his mind. As he screamed, I could see Tim's body move on its own, to which the man only reacted by scratching, but with such force that I thought he would pull his skin off. It was easy to see that Tim, while visibly furious, was also in a great deal of pain. However, none of this made me question what was happening. No matter how much Tim was suffering, I was the victim, and he was the person attacking me. In the midst of his fit of rage, Tim concentrated on smashing the closet, totally ignoring the fact that I was standing next to him. I took advantage of this situation to slowly approach the huge garage door. Once there, I moved it slowly to open it. The door was very hard, and I could only open it a few centimeters, which served to let some natural light into the garage. Unfortunately, that light went right into the closet Tim was destroying, which alerted him immediately. Before I could finish opening the door and escape, I felt Tim's shadow behind me again. As soon as I turned around and faced him once more, he grabbed my face with both hands and without squeezing, gave a huge, terrifying battle cry with his face almost pressed against mine. That was the most terrifying moment I have ever experienced in my life, even worse than when he had flung me a few minutes before. His scream felt so loud, so violent, and so imposing that I felt it pierced my whole body and took away my will to continue trying to escape. After that scream, I fell to the ground, sitting down, crying with my eyes wide open. Tim was preparing to attack me once more, but at the last moment, salvation came. The garage door kept opening. It wasn't opening by itself. Several people behind it were pushing it. They were my neighbors. They were trying to get me out of the house. At that moment, I realized that even though I had not screamed or warned them that I was in danger, they all knew what I did for a living and that I was always receiving people in my garage. Tim's loud and violent screams and all the noise generated by such destruction alerted my neighbors, and almost all of them came to see what was happening to me. Once they had managed to open the garage door, they dragged me out before the eyes of a Tim who, instead of attacking them, took the opportunity that the door was open to run out of the house in his underwear. All my neighbors came to my rescue and immediately took me to the hospital. I had been saved. I must tell you, that was the last day I saw Tim. Or at least I think it was. From that day on, he never showed up or posted anything on social media again. His family never responded to my messages or tried to contact me. I never understood what happened to this man and how he went from having such a calm personality to whatever happened that afternoon. I must admit that in spite of everything, I always think about him and worry about him. Since that day, all the neighbors report seeing some kind of animal running through the neighborhood at night. I know this doesn't make sense, but sometimes I wonder, what if that monster is Tim?
My name is Charles, and for years, I've been the driver of the last bus. My shift starts at midnight and ends at 4 in the morning. Working the night shift has its share of loneliness, of course, but I've never experienced anything quite like what happened one autumn night. For the first few hours of my shift, everything went smoothly. A few passengers got on and off. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when I arrived at the last stop before turning around and returning to the depot. The stop was located in a dark and desolate part of town, right next to an old cemetery. There were a couple of dim streetlights, but most of the streetlights were out. As usual, no passengers were waiting at the stop. As I waited for the scheduled time before departing, I turned on the interior lights of the bus to check that everything was in order. I was checking my rearview mirror when I saw a flash of movement in the darkness. I turned to look out the rearview mirror and, to my surprise, saw a man running toward the bus. It was not unusual for people to be late and trying to catch the last bus, but the way this man was moving struck me as odd. His movements were jerky and erratic, as if he was panicking. When he finally reached the back of the bus, panting and sweating, I could see his face. He was a middle-aged man with a wild, desperate look in his eyes. I decided to slow the bus down so that this man wouldn't miss it. I was never really one of those drivers who enjoy passengers missing the bus to go home, especially at times like that. The man got on the bus and sat in the back of the bus. His disturbing smile never disappeared from his face. I looked through the rearview mirror and noticed that there were no other passengers on the bus at that time. The bus resumed its march, and as we made our way through the empty streets, the man began to hum a haunting song. It was an ominous tune that I did not recognize, and his voice had an eerie tone that sent chills down my spine. As we moved on, the man continued his strange behavior. He began mumbling incoherent words and laughed disturbingly. I became increasingly uncomfortable and concerned for my safety. The possibility that I was dealing with a dangerous person became increasingly real. Finally, the man stood up and pressed the button indicating that he was getting off. This stop was completely deserted as usual. When I opened the door for the man to get off, he just stood there and kept smiling. I asked him to get off, but he did not respond. Instead, he began to walk slowly toward the front of the bus. I felt trapped in my seat, watching with growing anxiety as the man advanced toward me. His smile widened even more, revealing crooked yellow teeth. I realized I did not know how to deal with this situation, and the thought of confronting him directly terrified me. When the man was only a few steps away from me, he finally spoke. His voice was an eerie, icy whisper that made me shiver. "Do you know who I am, driver?" I shook my head, unable to answer. I had no idea who this man was or what he wanted. "Don't you remember? I was one of your passengers many years ago, one night just like this. But you wouldn't let me off. You had fun watching me miss the last bus, didn't you?" I had no memory of that incident, but that didn't matter at the time. I was too scared to think clearly. The man moved even closer, his face inches from mine. I could feel his cold, stinking breath on my face. "This is your last stop, driver. Today, it's your turn to stay behind." Before I could react, the man pushed me back with enormous force. I fell to the ground stunned as he lunged at me. I tried to scream, but his cold, skeletal hand closed over my throat, stifling my words. Looking terrified, I struggled desperately with the man who assaulted me. His eyes, full of fury and madness, were still fixed on mine as his grip grew tighter and tighter. I felt my life slipping away, and an overwhelming panic overcame me. In a last act of survival, I reached for a small flashlight I kept in my jacket pocket. I wielded it with all my strength and hit the man's head with all my might. The impact knocked him back, releasing his hold on my throat. Coughing and gasping, I took the opportunity to pull away from him. As I sat up, I saw the man withering in pain on the ground, holding his head. He looked dazed and confused. Without a second thought, I ran to the driver's door and slammed the safety door of the bus shut, making sure he couldn't reach me. Then frantically, I reached for my cell phone and called 911 for help. The emergency operator's voice calmed my nerves. I explained the situation and the location of the bus. I was promised that the police would be dispatched immediately. As I waited, I held the flashlight in one hand and the bus steering wheel in the other, watching the man on the ground. The man began to come to his senses, but instead of trying to open the front door or looking for a way out, he just sat there and stared at me. His haunting smile persisted, and it was bigger than ever. He didn't seem to be in pain or show any normal emotion. When the police officers finally arrived, the man was arrested without much resistance. As they handcuffed the man, he continued to whisper incomprehensible words and laugh, which increased my discomfort and fear of him. The officers assured me that an investigation would be conducted and that they would take steps to ensure my safety. After giving my statement to the police, I made my way to the bus stop, shaking and shocked by the experience. I couldn't recall any similar incidents, but the thought of having left someone behind on a night like that haunted me. Eventually, the authorities discovered that the man suffered from severe mental illness and had been wandering the streets for years. He was not one of my former passengers as he had claimed. Although that revelation relieved me to some extent, the experience left me deeply scarred. From that day on, nights working on the bus became even more lonely and terrifying for me. Every shadow in the darkness, every haunting laugh reminded me of that autumn night. The story became an urban legend in the area. My night bus, known as the Last Bus, gained an infamous reputation. Though I tried to move on, that sinister smile and the man's icy whispers never completely disappeared from my thoughts. and my nightlife was changed forever. It's undeniable that some people find it easier to find a job than others. The job market is very wide for young university students hungry for success. For me, on the other hand, it's very different. My name is Alfred, and I am 50 years old. But this is not a story about how hard it was to find a job. Today, I will tell you how the job I got, with a lot of effort, is almost the last job of my life. Because of life, I was never able to study or finish school. Looking for a job at my age was really very difficult. But I am the only breadwinner in my family, so I had to do it. Every job I went to, they told me different things. Some would tell me that they would call me after talking to other candidates, but I could see in their eyes that they knew they wouldn't. Others were more direct and told me I was too old for any job, even something as simple as a supermarket cashier. I went from failure to failure, but just as I was giving up, I got an opportunity and started working right away. The job was quite simple. I was going to be the caretaker of a soccer field. The team was pretty humble, so the stadium was pretty modest too. I'm used to everyone at work pretending I'm not there, and when they noticed my existence, it was to ask me for things in a bad way or make fun of me. But this place was different. All the players and workers at the club were really warm and welcoming. They all made me feel a part of a big family that started with the president and ended with me. The people at this job were very nice, and in the beginning, I was very happy. Until I discovered something that changed everything. Although it felt like a warm and friendly place during the day, the locker room was pretty old. When no one was in them, they looked abandoned and very scary. To tell you the truth, I didn't feel scared or anything like that. I was a grown-up person, and I wasn't in the mood for superstitions or getting scared just because I was alone. The players told ghost stories and said that the field was haunted. They would tell me to be careful at night when I was alone, but I could tell that they were all laughing and not taking themselves seriously. My first nights guarding the court were pretty quiet. I came close to falling asleep several times. I really had nothing to do, but eventually I would get used to it and have a routine prepared, like carrying a book that I would read after cleaning up. I must admit that I heard several noises inside the locker room or in the facilities in general, but none of them caught my attention. Wherever I go, there will always be noises. If I am scared by each one of them, I would have to dedicate myself to something else. The important thing was that there were no people sneaking into the facility or a rat problem. I was pretty quiet all night and didn't let anything break my peace. Little did I know that this tranquility would give me a false sense of confidence that would endanger my life. That day, my shift was just beginning. I had just finished cleaning the players' locker room and I was leaving to clean a hallway, but I heard a noise that caught my attention. The noise was coming from inside the locker room and it was too loud to ignore. Surely, no animal could have done it. It was like a thump as if someone had tried to destroy a dugout, but there was no one there, as I had just exited through the only entrance to that locker room. Confused, I took out my cell phone and went back into the locker room, recording everything I saw. I didn't realize it at the time, but during the recording, a terrifying shadow passed by the wall at an enormous speed. Even though I didn't see the shadow, I felt like something in the locker room had changed in the 3 minutes I had left. It may have been the same locker room visually, but now there was something about it that terrified me. The place felt icy cold, as if a huge, windless, gelid chill had taken over the whole place. Immediately, I got goosebumps, not because of the cold, but because I felt that I was no longer alone. Before I could react, the battery of my cell phone ran out and it turned off, which made no sense because until a few minutes ago, I had it at more than 80% charge. Without seeing anything, but knowing that I was not alone, I ran out of the locker room as fast as I could, but it was not going to be that easy. Halfway through, I ran out of air and fell to the ground. It was a horrible feeling. I couldn't breathe and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. I gathered all my strength to get up again, but there was someone in front of me. There was a man, a local soccer player I didn't know. Why was he dressed as if he was going to play a match? Confused, I got up as best I could, and at that moment, I realized that something was wrong with this man. His skin was whiter than that of a normal person. It was too pale a white color, unnatural, as if he were dead. His eyes were glassy and his body was full of bruises. The moment our eyes met, the man began to cry tears of blood running down his face at enormous speed. Whatever this was, it was not human. While still trying to catch my breath, I tried to run past him, but he grabbed me by the neck with one hand. As I stood up, the man looked at me with a desperate and sad face and shouted, "You must help me! Who are you? Let me go! Please, you have to help me. I didn't ask for this. I was desperate. I'm married. I have a 3-year-old son. It can't end like this. Help me." "Hey man, I have a family too. I don't know who you are, but please don't hurt me." "I just want to see my family. You don't understand the things they do to me. I can't go back. I don't want to go back. I just want to have another chance to hug my family. I want to see them again. I don't want to do this. I was lost and no one would help me. I beg you, do something." Make no mistake, I was terrified. Every fiber of my body was screaming that I was in enormous danger. But while he was saying these things to me, while this man was screaming at me and squeezing me with his arm, I felt that there was no evil in him. There was desperation. Suddenly, he let go of me and screamed for help again. But this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking behind me. The temperature dropped even lower, and even though the light was on, the room got darker and darker with each passing second. I looked behind me and saw a bunch of shadows going from one place to another, slowly approaching where we were. "They are here! Don't let them take me, please!" In a matter of seconds, the shadows surrounded the whole place, and ignoring me, they threw themselves against the terrified man. The shadows began to surround his entire body as he screamed louder and louder in despair. He dropped to the floor and began to spin as if on fire. And in my presence, something invisible began to drag him around the place until I lost sight of him. I could not believe anything I had just seen. My only reaction was to stay on the floor in the fetal position, crying and praying that this was all a nightmare. As soon as I got home, I saw my family surprised that I had arrived early. Without saying a word to them, I hugged them and started crying. After I didn't answer them when they asked me what was wrong, they just hugged me. The next day, I went to present my resignation. When I told the president of the club the whole story, he was shocked. At first, he thought it was a bad joke perpetuated by the players. But when I told him about the man, he believed me. This man was a soccer player who had been with the club when it was founded. Being a small club, not many people know this, but this man had taken his own life by hanging himself with a rope, leaving his family alone. The last thing he told me was that, normally, he would not have believed me. But the night before, someone with the voice of the deceased player knocked on his office door asking for help. But when he went to see, there was no one there. After accepting my resignation, he told me that he only hoped that he was now in a better place and had found peace. I was left thinking with some bitterness that by the looks of those shadows that took him away, I don't think that happened. The 7th of November, 2014, was a day that marked a turning point in my life. Before that faithful day, I was someone who enjoyed experiencing new and exciting things. But after the horrors I witnessed at the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa, I hadn't had a good night's sleep since. To fully understand my story, I'll need to take you back to the 9th of June, 1912. One of the most horrifying days the state of Iowa has ever seen. It all began with a family called the Moores. The head of the house was a man named Josiah B. Moore, and his wife was Sarah Nee Montgomery Moore. The couple had 4 children named Mary, Herman Montgomery, Arthur Boyd, and Paul Vernon. The Moores were a very well-known and affluent family in the community, and they were liked by everyone. That Sunday, the couple's 10-year-old daughter, Catherine, invited 2 sisters over to spend the night at their home, as they were her friends. Catherine's friends were named Lena Gertrude and Ina May Stillinger. Lena was 12 and Ina was 8. After the visitors had settled in, the entire Moore family, in addition to Lena and Ina, went to the Presbyterian church that evening. The family visited the church because they were participating in a Children's Day program that Catherine's mother, Sarah, had coordinated. The Children's Day event lasted until 9:30 p.m. that night, and when it was finally over, the family and their guests walked home. They all arrived at the Moore's residence between 9:45 and 10 p.m. And that was the last time the family and their guests were seen alive. On the 10th of June, 1912, sometime around 7 a.m. that morning, A woman named Miss Mary Peckham started to get worried after she noticed that the Moore family had not come out to do their morning chores. Miss Peckham was one of the Moore's neighbors, and not seeing them out and about this early was odd. She knocked on the door to see if everything was okay, but nobody answered. She knew that eerie silence was strange, so she tried opening the door, but it was locked. With no other options, she called Josiah's brother, Mr. Ross Moore, to help her check on them. When Ross arrived, he called out to his brother, but no one answered. So he and Miss Peckham decided to get into the house with Ross's spare key. When they finally got in, they were met with a horrific sight. The disfigured bodies of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters were found in their home by Ross Moore and Miss Mary Peckham on the 10th of June, 1912. The authorities were immediately called to the scene, and an investigation revealed that the murders had taken place between midnight and 5 a.m. The killer, who had been waiting in the attic for the family to fall asleep, started the massacre from the master bedroom where Josiah and Sarah Moore slept. The killer used an axe to repeatedly hack Josiah's face. The cuts to his face were so vicious that Josiah's eyes were missing, and his corpse was unrecognizable. The authorities also noticed a gouge mark in the ceiling of the master bedroom, from where the killer had lifted the axe to murder him. When Josiah was dead, the killer set his sights on Sarah, and he brought down the axe's blade on her head, shattering her skull with his continuous blows. As for the couple's children, he used the blunt end of the axe on their heads as he crushed their skulls. The vicious killer had bludgeoned them all to death in the same morbid manner as their parents. After that, he went downstairs to the guest bedroom and killed the Stillinger sisters. Josiah Moore was only 43 when he was killed, and his wife Sarah was 39. As for their children, Herman was 11, May Catherine was 10, Arthur was 7, and Paul was 5. The gruesome murders of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters shocked the entire town of Villisca. A manhunt was carried out to find the person responsible, but the killer was never found, and the crime still remains unsolved. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how this gruesome case has anything to do with my experience. But just like the Moores and the Stillinger sisters, I too had a horrific experience in their family home located at 508 East 2nd Street, Villisca. Just like most people in Iowa, I've known about the murders for as long as I can remember. I was born on the 13th of October, 1978, nearly 66 years after the murders. But even after all that time had passed, this gruesome case was still being talked about. The gruesome case was dubbed the Villisca Axe Murders, and it's often been called the most mysterious case in the United States. During my early teenage years, I always wondered why the Villisca Axe Murder case still maintained its longevity. There were many other disturbing cases in the United States that have left the minds of the masses, and I often asked myself why the Villisca Axe Murders case was so different. I looked into it a bit more when I grew older, and I soon realized why this particular case was so different than the rest. It's because, while some people believe the Moores are long dead, many others are convinced that the Moore family and their killer still roam the halls of their family home in Villisca. The rumors started a little while after the gruesome murders, as many people claimed to hear the screams of children coming from the house. Most of the Villisca residents wrote these rumors off as jokes. But as time passed by, people who visited the house came back telling more unexplainable and bizarre stories. A couple who visited the home said they could hear the Moores' children laughing as they ran around the home playing. 2 young women also reported capturing strange phantasms and apparitions on their cameras. The stories got even crazier over the years, and in 1994, a woman named Miss Martha Lynn bought the house and restored it to its 1912 condition. She stripped the Moore family home of electricity and plumbing, and she turned it into a tourist attraction. Since then, people from all over the world have come to the Villisca Axe Murder House to stay overnight and undergo paranormal experiences. The Villisca Axe Murder House has had a slew of visitors ranging from paranormal investigators to ghost hunters, and was eventually named one of the most haunted places in America. The house grew to new heights of popularity from there, and it seemed like everyone wanted to visit there. Well, everyone except me. Even though I grew up in Iowa, I always stayed clear of the place. As I said earlier, I was the kind of guy who enjoyed experiencing thrilling and exhilarating things. There were very few things I would say no to, as I was always down for anything. However, the only time I drew the line was whenever it was anything paranormal related. It had been like that since I was little, as I was always against exploring the supernatural or paranormal world. My grandmother was a strong believer in the paranormal, and while most people called her crazy, I always felt there was some truth to her crazy stories. I had sworn to never visit the Villisca Axe Murder House. But all that changed when my longtime friend Ron Lancaster visited me in Iowa. I'd met Ron during my years in college, and we'd been brothers since. Just like me, Ron enjoyed trying crazy new things, but he didn't have the same issues with anything supernatural or paranormal. Ron thought both the supernatural and paranormal worlds were all hocus pocus, and in a bid to convince me of the same, begged me to go with him to the Villisca Axe Murder House. I told him no, and nothing was going to change my mind. Ron was persistent, and he kept asking, but it didn't work. With no other options, Ron told me that he was traveling abroad the very next month, and that he really just wanted to go on a crazy adventure for old time's sake, as he wasn't sure when we'd see each other again. I wasn't sure if he was trying to guilt trip me into going or if he was serious. But his visit was almost over, so against my better judgment, I agreed. On the 7th of November 2014, my friend Ron and I made our way to the Villisca Axe Murder House. The tourist attraction cost $428 per night, and I felt that was far too steep. But Ron offered to pay for 2 nights. Once everything had been settled, they showed us to the rooms. I remember being really freaked out throughout the night, but Ron kept cracking jokes and trying to lighten the mood. We eventually went to bed that night, and I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. I actually had a pretty good night's sleep. The very next day, Ron couldn't stop saying, "I told you so." And even though I didn't want to admit it, he was right. I told myself that all the so-called paranormal experiences were a hoax, and I was completely over my fears. After the first night, we both spent the second day making corny ghost jokes and laughing. I was enjoying myself at the time, and I was really glad I came with Ron. But little did I know that I'd grow to regret that decision in the following minutes. Ron had gone up to his room to get his phone around 12:25 a.m., but it had been about 10 minutes, and he hadn't come back down. I wondered what was keeping him, so I went upstairs to check. When I entered the room, I saw Ron sitting on the chair with a wide grin on his face. I thought he was trying to pull a prank at first, so I told him to cut it out. But Ron didn't respond. I was about to smack him across the head when I noticed his eyes. They were filled with pure fear, and I could tell he was terrified. In an instant, the room went cold, and I couldn't move. A few seconds after that, a foul smell of rotting flesh began to fill the room, and that's when I saw it. I've always been at a loss for words whenever I try to explain what my eyes were seeing, but it looked like some unseen figure was controlling Ron. I couldn't make out its shape, but I could tell something or someone was tugging at Ron's mouth and forcing him to smile. I also noticed Ron couldn't move by himself, and this unseen presence was playing with his body like a puppet. The scene looked like a puppet show from hell, as it seemed like Ron's limbs were being controlled by strings. I watched in horror as Ron's hand reached for the blunt scissors on the table. I could see the terror in his eyes as he struggled to make sense of what was going on, and we both tried to scream, but our lips wouldn't move. I then watched Ron take the blunt scissors and ram them into his right eye. I felt like throwing up as I watched the blood gush down from his face. I thought he was possessed at that point, because even though he was bleeding profusely, he still had a smile on his face. Ron then stabbed himself in the left eye before proceeding to repeatedly stab himself in the chest. My brain couldn't really process what was going on or why this was happening, and it was amidst all this chaos that I finally saw it. The thing I had sensed behind Ron had finally taken shape. It was a rotting corpse that stood at 7 to 8 feet tall. Its facial features had been eaten away by maggots, so it didn't look human, and its right hand was shaped like a large axe. Within seconds of its manifestation, the standing corpse disappeared, and I let out a scream before collapsing on the floor. The staff rushed to our room to see me lying on the floor and Ron bleeding in the chair. We were both rushed to a nearby hospital, and luckily, we were able to be saved. I don't really remember what happened during the week after that experience, but according to the doctors, I kept screaming until I lost my voice for 3 days straight. It would take me 6 months and serious therapy before I was able to speak again, and even after telling my story, people found it hard to believe. Ron, who had lost both his eyes, was the only person able to corroborate my story, but he was put into an asylum as he kept muttering gibberish whenever he was asked to speak. The news took the headlines by storm as the authorities struggled to explain what had happened that day. It would take me 2 years of serious psychological care before I was able to acclimate back into society. I've also been going to therapy every single day since then, and I was ordered to move back in with my family as I still showed some trace of insanity. And I wasn't allowed to be alone. The therapy isn't really working as I can still see it every time I close my eyes. I rarely go out and I have to be watched 24/7. Even if it's been 9 years, I can never forget the valuable lesson I learned from my visit to the Villisca Axe Murder House. As every day I wake up, I remind myself that the dead are not to be disturbed. The story you just heard was loosely based on the real case of Robert Stephen Larson Jr. On the 7th of November 2014, 37-year-old Robert Lawson from Rhinelander, Wisconsin, was found alone in the northwest bedroom of the Villisca Axe Murder House with self-inflicted stab wounds in the chest. After the investigation, Montgomery County Sheriff Joe Sampson stated that Robert arrived with a group of friends for a recreational paranormal investigation at the Villisca Axe Murder House. A few minutes after entering the northwest bedroom, Robert called the rest of the party, who were standing outside, for help on their mobile two-way radios, Sampson told me. His companions found him stabbed in the chest from a strike that was apparently self-inflicted. They immediately called 911, and Robert was brought to a nearby hospital before being helicoptered to Crichton University Medical Center in Omaha. The police report also stated that the strange incident happened around 12:45 a.m., a time frame that mysteriously coincided with the approximate time that the brutal murders of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters took place. Luckily, Robert Lawson was able to recover from his injuries, but he declined to speak publicly about what occurred that day. The owner of the Villisca Axe Murder House, Miss Martha Lynn, told the press that the incident was very upsetting and made a statement on the incident saying, "It's publicity, but it's not exactly the kind of publicity you desire to have. I don't want people thinking that when they come to the Villisca Axe Murder House, something's going to happen that's going to make them do something like that." Despite the strange and unexplainable incident with Mr. Robert Lawson, the Villisca Axe Murder House remains open for tourist visits and overnight stays to this very day. Back in the day before technology and social media became such an important part of our daily lives, making friends wasn't as easy as it is now. Most of the pretty women I saw in a day, I would never see again, mostly because I didn't have the balls to walk up to them and get to know them. At the same time, I was what you called a socially awkward person, and I had to go through some other means to get to know people. But then suddenly came Facebook, an app where people can make friends and find out almost everything they wanted to know about someone else, all with a simple friend request. But it wasn't what I thought it'd be, as my experience with Facebook completely changed my life. My name is Timothy Hansen, and the year was 2007. Facebook had just launched 3 years prior and was blowing up in 2006 as people had started preferring it to MySpace. I had been quite skeptical about joining at first, as I wasn't a huge fan of sharing my information online, but I eventually caved and decided to create a Facebook account. If I remember correctly, my first few suggestions were all people in New York, and I spent a while just going through their profiles, wondering if I should send a friend request, and that's when I saw her, Annabelle Tate. She was simply the most beautiful woman I had seen, but what intrigued me the most about her was her profile. It was full of pictures of her and her friends at parties, going on vacations, and in general, just living her best life. I spent a while thinking about what to do before eventually sending her a friend request. She accepted in about 2 hours and texted, "Hi, I'm Annabelle." The conversation from that point flowed as Annabelle was a very easygoing person, although now that I think about it, I believe it was just the comfort of being behind a screen. We talked for about a week online, majorly about me as she asked a lot of questions about my past and life in general. I eventually decided to ask her to meet in person. "Do you want to meet up sometime?" She replied, "Sure, where do you want to meet?" "We could get dinner tomorrow night." "I'm not in the city right now, but I get back tomorrow, so maybe the day after?" "Sure." I went out the next day to the restaurant we had agreed to meet. She wasn't there yet, so I decided to text her and ask her if everything was okay. Is everything all right? I'm on my way, just running a bit late. I waited for about 10 more minutes and then I saw her. The first thing I noticed was Annabelle was a lot skinnier than she looked on her profile. She also had bags under her eyes that she had tried to cover up with makeup. She walked up to me and sat at the table before smiling and saying,
"Hey."
I smiled back and replied, "You look tired. Are you sure you're okay?" She laughed as she picked up the menu and called for the waiter. Annabelle was just as relaxed and easygoing as she was online. We talked about a lot that night, but for the most of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Annabelle, so I said, "Listen, are you sure you're all right? If you're not up for this, we could hang out at my place or I could take you home." She took a while to stare at her food before looking up and replying,
"I like the idea of going back to yours."
So we got the check and left. We kept talking as we walked to my apartment. We walked in and I told Annabelle to make herself comfortable while I made her a drink. I made her a gin and tonic and got back from the kitchen to see Annabelle standing playing with her thumbs as if she was nervous, so I said, "I know you said everything's all right, but are you sure you're fine?" She shook her head and replied,
Look, Tim, you're a really nice guy, but if we're going to go any further in whatever this is, there's something you need to know.
I walked closer to her as my mind raced as to what she was about to say.
You've probably already noticed I look different from my profile. Well, that's because I've not been active for a while on that account. And the reason I've not been active on that account is that I've been really sick, and life's been so shit lately. I don't know how much longer I have or if I even have time at all.
She was crying now, but all I could think about was how her profile managed to paint a completely fake picture of who she was. She continued with,
My family's been telling me it isn't the end and I should still try to be me, and that's why I accepted your friend request. I just don't want you to get your hopes up.
It's so hard having to follow them around or just taking one I don't know anything about with them crying and screaming the whole time. I won't ever forget the feeling I got seeing the look of realization on Annabelle's face as I spoke. The worry and fear were nothing like I had seen before. She tried hitting me, but there was no use as I dragged her and held her down on the couch, and that's when she began screaming. I grabbed her throat and pressed down so hard, saying, "Stop screaming, Annabelle. Don't worry, you won't have to bother about how much longer you have to live." Her struggle continued, but not for long. I had my way with her as she passed out and died. So there you have it, officer. Annabelle Tate was my first time using Facebook, and my, what an experience she was. You're a sick man, Timothy. I'll make sure you spend the rest of your days behind bars. Say what you will, officer, but if you ask me, I didn't do anything wrong. All I did was ask to be their friend, and they agreed. All I truly wanted were some friends. You raped and killed 19 women using Facebook, and God knows how many before that. And you say all you wanted were friends? Well, you won't have to worry about that anymore. You'll soon find out what happens to your kind in prison. I'm sure a lot of people would like to be your friend. I hope so. People like you don't deserve compassion. Well, if that's true, officer, I guess it's a good thing I found Facebook. Hi, my name is Aiden, and I have a question for you. Have you ever worked at a fast food place? What's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you? I know a lot of people who have never really had anything happen to them other than drunken customers making a mess or family fights. In the beginning, I had never experienced anything like this, and I didn't think it would really happen to me, since I only worked in a humble neighborhood Popeye's Chicken. I never knew that in just a few months, I would have the worst night of my life. The beginning of my night shift at Popeye's went along with the typical routine of a quiet night. It was around 10 o'clock at night, a time when we usually receive more customers, and the atmosphere was chaotic, with the intense murmur of conversations scattered among the tables. But among all the people talking, one person stood out. A very tall, thin man had entered. His eyes were small but terrifying, as they were wide open. He sat in a corner away from the rest of the diners, and what disturbed me most was not simply his appearance, but his fixed, penetrating gaze. He watched each individual with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. As the night progressed, more customers joined the scene, but this man remained static, making no requests, simply observing. It was as if he was analyzing people, studying their every move. On the other hand, no one noticed him. He was like a ghost that only I could see. Suddenly, the man walked towards a family having dinner. As soon as he arrived, he looked at them all and gave them a smile. However, there was something wrong with that smile. It was rather forced, as if he was practicing an emotion that did not come naturally to him. As he engaged the family in conversation, I could sense the discomfort in them, as if something was undoubtedly out of place. The man, who seemed to be a stranger to everyone, approached the tables uninvited. As he walked, his smile widened, but his eyes remained wide open. They never seemed to close. It was as if the man never blinked. Each word he spoke seemed more intense than the last, and families became increasingly terrified after meeting him. Some even grabbed their food and left. At first, all the families he spoke to tried to be polite and friendly, but as time went on, the atmosphere became more and more tense. The man's gestures were disproportionate and his laughter was enormous. I kept watching him from my position behind the counter, attentive to what was happening. Some children were crying, and parents were looking at me sideways as if looking for help to get rid of this man without having to fight him. The man didn't seem willing to leave. It was as if he was enjoying the discomfort he was generating in others. I decided to approach, trying to remain calm. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need anything?" I asked with a forced smile, trying to hide the uneasiness that his presence generated in me. The man turned to me slowly. His gaze was fixed on me. It was penetrating and terrifying. I must admit that I froze. "Oh no, I don't need anything at all. I'm just enjoying the company. Isn't that the charm of a fast food restaurant?" His words chilled my blood. There was nothing in what he said that could be considered threatening, but something in his tone and look was sinister, as if he was toying with all of us. After a defiant smile, the man simply walked out of the restaurant as if nothing had happened. I could hear people still talking about the strange man who had appeared in the restaurant, but unlike before, they were now telling it as if it were an anecdote and making jokes, no longer afraid that the man would approach their table and do something to them. Shortly after, the clock struck 11 o'clock at night, and I decided to go out for a short break. I walked out to the parking lot of the restaurant with a cigarette in my hand. I was still quite nervous about my encounter with the scary man, but I feel I handled the situation really well. Even so, I still felt a sense of discomfort. It was as if something was still wrong. As I walked out into the parking lot, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I headed towards my car, but in a moment, a strange hunt made me pay more attention. There in the shadows, I made out the figure of the man. He was standing near my vehicle, watching it carefully. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The man slowly turned to me, his smile widening eerily. His face reflected an unsettling calm as if he was enjoying my surprise and fear. Without a word, he began to walk toward me with slow, deliberate steps. My heart began to pound. I instinctively backed away, trying to get back to the restaurant. I didn't know how to handle the situation. The man, with his erratic gaze and unpredictable attitude, kept getting closer. Each step he took intimidated me more than the other. I was so scared that I could barely react. "You don't need to be afraid. I'm just here to have a conversation with you." The man continued to advance toward me with a slowness that seemed intentional. I tried to run away, but suddenly something happened to me at the worst possible moment. As soon as I started to run, I fell to the ground dizzy. It was hard to breathe, and I felt like I was going to die. I couldn't feel my arms, my legs. I couldn't feel almost anything in my body. Please stop. I'm having a panic attack. Please, don't do anything to me." "Hey, what's wrong with you?
Why is this happening to you? Are you afraid of me? I just wanted to talk.
I'm sorry. I'm not feeling well.
I told you I need to talk.
Suddenly, his expression changed. His head began to shake and his eyes got even bigger. It looked like they were going out of place. His scream was so loud that it made me cry out in fear, still unable to escape.
Don't you understand? Can't you see I've been nice all night? Why can't I have a normal conversation with anyone? Have you all gone crazy? I want to talk. I want to talk. I want to talk.
As soon as he finished the last word, the man lifted me off the ground with his two hands and threw me away from him. Crying, thinking I was going to have a heart attack, I started to drag myself to the restaurant. After mustering up some energy, I got up from the ground and made a great effort to run, but I stumbled. I fell to the ground, hitting the rough pavement with bated breath.
Come on, can't you even run? Hey, come on, you can do it. Just a little run. If you can't even run, some bad guy will hurt you.
With the help of the psycho, I got up crying and ran again. I was limping, crying, humiliated. The sounds of footsteps behind me stopped. I dared to look back, and the man just stood there waving at me. With my heart pounding, I arrived at the restaurant. I tried to tell him everything that happened, but I fell back to the floor. I have had many panic attacks in my life, but this was the worst. I felt like I was going to die at any moment, but I still tried to talk. I needed the police to be called, or this psycho would hurt someone. Once I recovered, I was able to tell the manager to call the police, as there was a psychopath in the parking lot. Without hesitation, the man went to the cash register and started pushing the panic button under the counter. It didn't take long for the police to arrive, but the man was gone. Although I never saw the strange individual again that night or any other night, his presence continued to haunt me in every shadow, every dark corner of the store. As the restaurant closed, my manager called me a cab. As soon as the car started, I swear I could see a silhouette in the shadows looking at me. I could see the silhouette raise a hand and with a sinister smile, wave at me from a distance. That was the last time I saw that man again. To be honest, that was the last time I ever went near Popeyes. Nowadays, every time I leave my house, I do it with fear. There is no way for that psycho to know where I live, but I always feel that he is near me, stalking me, ready to kill me.
Hey guys, my name is Adam, and I have a story to tell you. On the outside, I'm sure I look like a normal person, someone who doesn't have much to say or just goes through much in this life. What no one knows is that I lived a night that would change anyone's life, and the consequences of what I lived are still haunting me. It all started one night in December. I was driving down a lonely road in the middle of the night. I wasn't really going anywhere, I just liked to drive at this time. I know many people will disagree and tell me that it's reckless and dangerous, but those comments never bothered me. The drive was going well. It didn't seem to be a very special night, and nothing unusual was happening. But about halfway through, one of the worst possible things that could happen to me. The car started to fail, and soon it came to a complete stop. I had no cell phone signal and was far from anywhere inhabited. I stood outside the car, waiting for someone to come by, but I knew this was very unlikely, so I left the car on the road and decided to walk in search of help. I walked for a while and found a house at the end of the road. I approached it in the hope that someone might be able to help me. I knocked on the door, thinking about how I could convince them that I wasn't a psychopath or someone dangerous. But to my surprise, I was greeted by a couple who didn't doubt me for a second. They looked friendly, invited me in, offered me food and a place to stay for the night. I admit I started to feel a little uncomfortable, but maybe it was because they were too nice. At that moment, I thought that we were so used to people being cruel or self-serving that when we really see nice people, we get uncomfortable or think something's wrong. As we were eating dinner, I noticed that the food tasted strange, but I didn't say anything for fear of offending my hosts. They were both looking at me with huge grins from ear to ear. They seemed to be obsessed with me eating. After a few more bites, I decided to retire to rest in the room they offered me. In the middle of the night, I heard strange noises outside my room. I carefully got up and tried to get out to see what was going on, but I couldn't. The door to the room was locked. I tried not to panic, not to scream, and tried not to break the door down. But while I was thinking about what to do, I began to hear voices from the other side of the...
It seems our little guest didn't enjoy his dinner.
I know. I'm sure it lacked enough spices. He made me feel very bad.
He's ungrateful, but keep in mind he's not in his own house. It makes sense that he's a little uncomfortable.
I know, darling. Thank you.
At that moment, I relaxed a little. Maybe I was overreacting. I considered going back to sleep and the next day to apologize for the way I left the table. But suddenly, I heard something else.
Besides, what does it matter if he enjoyed the dinner or not? We're basically just feeding a piglet.
It's true, honey. You have to keep him well fed. Tomorrow, I'll make him a big breakfast. That way, when we open him up, he'll taste better.
I can't wait to taste it. It sure is delicious. I just don't understand how human flesh is so good.
Hearing those last words, my blood froze, and I was paralyzed with terror. In that instant, I understood the true nature of this family. They were cannibals. I was in the house of a family of monsters that fed on human beings. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped in the middle of the night, far from any help. I tried to stay calm, but fear paralyzed me. I activated the location on my cell phone and sent it to my brother, telling him I needed help. I quickly told him that I was kidnapped and that if he didn't act quickly, I would be killed. Before I could do anything else, I heard footsteps approaching. I tried to hide, but before I could, the door was opening. It was one of them, with a cold and sinister look. He grabbed me tightly and dragged me into another room.
You know, I knew you were listening to everything I was saying. Why do you think I said it out loud? Do you think because we live on the road we don't have cameras?
Please, don't eat me. Let me out.
Oh, come on. You think after all you heard I'd let you go?
I tried to resist, but he was stronger. He dragged me down the hall and threw me into a room with extreme ease. And as the wife arrived and joined her husband, I saw something that left me in shock. There were dismembered bodies. Human remains everywhere. I tried to escape, struggling with all my might, but they were determined to make me their next victim. Grabbing me roughly, the man sat me on a chair and grabbed both my arms so I couldn't run away. Meanwhile, the woman slowly approached me. She had a huge smile on her face, and in her hands, she had a lighted needle puncher, which was slowly moving toward my head. You know, I was terrified, like I'd never been in my life. But a part of me had some hope. One thing I had noticed since I saw the woman with the hole punch was a strange smell coming from them. It was the smell of wine. At that moment, I felt the man grabbing me somewhat unsteadily and the woman walking towards me in a very slow and meticulous way. But at the same time, erratic. These people knew what they were doing. They had killed before and had every intention of doing it again. But this time, they made a mistake. They were completely drunk. I decided to try and stay calm and loosen my body a little, looking for an opportunity to attack. When the woman was almost at my side, I managed to kick her in the knee. This caused the man to be distracted for a moment, which I took advantage of to get away from him and hit him. As soon as I regained control of the situation, I ran away, without looking back, with my heart beating so hard that I felt it would leave my body. I ran and ran, not knowing where I was going. I was lost in the darkness of the night. I heard their voices behind me, chasing me. No matter how much alcohol they had, they were still very dangerous indeed, and if they caught me, They would not forgive me for running away. This was all a nightmare that refused to end. Finally, I saw lights in the distance. I ran towards the direction they were coming from, and then I identified the lights better. I realized that I was on the road and that those lights were the police. I came screaming for help, and when they saw me, one of them asked me if my name was Adam. Apparently, these cops were surrounding the area, looking for me. I told the police everything, and they called for reinforcements and went to the cannibal's house, but they didn't find them in the house. They were probably hiding in the woods from the moment they saw the police sirens. On the other hand, everything I told you proved to be true, since they found the corpses of the previous victims and managed to identify the brutal killers. To be honest, I don't know how the case ended. After giving my testimony, I decided to stay away from the trial altogether. I know for sure they both received life sentences, but I really didn't want to know anything else about what happened. I didn't want to remember at all what I experienced that night. That was the last night ride I ever took. It may have been a few years ago, but I still dream of that horrible room. When I wake up, I see the eyes of both psychopaths meeting mine. It's as if they never left, as if they live inside me, refusing to let me go on with my life and mocking me because I ate human flesh that night. Since the lockdown, there's been a drastic shift in the work culture all around the world. People are opting to work from home or work from anywhere options rather than going into the office 5 days a week. Around that time, a lot of new YouTubers popped up documenting their van life experiences, and a community of van lifers was created. Luckily, my wife Lisa was one of the first people to choose van living over traditional homes. We rented our current house, bought a spacious van, and started our journey on the road. To say we didn't know the ins and outs of van living would be an understatement. We knew nothing. From the few initial YouTubers, we learned the basics like showering, storage, cooking, and laundry. But beyond that, we learned as we traveled. We have no kids, so that wasn't an issue, and we could do our jobs completely remote, so money wasn't a problem either. Usually, we drove most of the day, and around 4 p.m, we found ourselves a good parking spot to set up and camp, and called it a day. We worked from our van and took turns driving. It was like one long road trip, but that doesn't mean we didn't face challenges on our way. Today, I'm about to share the scariest incident that happened to us in the dead of night. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was bright and sunny, and it was Lisa's turn to drive, so I was sitting in the back doing my work. We cooked a quick lunch, and we were on our way. Around sunset, we found ourselves in a dense forest-covered freeway. Although it was a freeway, the road was narrow, and hardly any vehicles were passing us. Lisa suggested that we find a good spot and park there for the night. I wasn't quite sure, as we were in the middle of nowhere. The sun was about to set, and we had a strict no driving in the dark policy. Eventually, we found a small building by the road, and we parked there. Lisa started preparing our dinner while I set up camp outside. Although our van is more of a minibus and is pretty self-sufficient, we both prefer to spend some time outdoors after we park for the night. As I was setting the camp, the sun had already set and it was pretty dark by then. I had a small battery-powered lamp and a head torch. I began my work, and by then I was pretty good at setting up camp. Then suddenly, I heard some kind of rustling in the bushes by the tree line, just a few yards away from me. It's normal for wild animals to be in such places, so I became cautious, but continued my work. I heard the rustling again after a few minutes, and this time it was much closer. At that point, I went inside and told Lisa about the rustling noises and grabbed the small video camera we used to document our travels. I held it in one hand and continued setting up camp. That's when I heard it for the first time. The piercing scream of a woman coming from deep within the woods. I freaked, as never before had I heard a screech that disturbing. I stilled and tried to search the area in front of me, only to hear the rustling sound one more time, followed by the loud scream of the woman once again. And then there were loud footsteps coming from the woods in our direction. I left all the camp gear behind, hopped into the van, shut the door, and locked it behind me. Lisa was a bit confused as she hadn't heard anything, but as I was about to explain, we saw someone peep into our van through the slits in the curtain. I dropped to the floor and stayed there for a while. We heard someone walk around our van a few times, and then the culprit finally pounded on our front door. Lisa was terrified, and so was I. We had come across some sketchy people throughout our road trips, but nothing of this sort yet. We had a small gun, but it was inaccessible at that moment. We just lay on the floor, hoping whoever it was would go away. But much to our disappointment, we heard the alarm set below our van go off, meaning this person or animal was below our van and was trying to get to the trap door which was below it. The next thing we knew, another alarm we had set for our safety had gone off. By then, we had no clue where the attacker was. All we could hear were the two loud beepings of the alarms. Lisa was clinging to my side, trembling and terrified. The alarms were still beeping, and after some time, everything became silent. The alarms had stopped beeping. We heard no screams, rustling, or footsteps. I slowly stood up and looked outside through the window. Everything was pitch black and quiet outside. I slowly opened the door, gathered all the camping gear I had left outside, and got back in. Then Lisa and I drove away from that campsite, not caring for our rules anymore. The GPS showed a small tow a few miles ahead, and by midnight, we arrived there. We parked our van in a local grocery store parking lot and decided to grab something to eat as we didn't get a chance to eat our dinner. In the local diner, there was hardly anyone except us. We sat there still for a few moments, just looking at each other, still recovering from the incident. That's when an old man dressed in a waiter's uniform walked up to us with a notepad in hand.
"What are you city folk doing here in our little town at this ungodly hour?"
I was the first one to talk, as Lisa was still speechless. I decided to act casual and place our order. We were just passing by and decided to make a pit stop in your lovely town. Could we both get 2 cheeseburgers and fries, please? We'd also like 1 chocolate milkshake with 2 straws. But instead of noting our order, the man kept on staring at Lisa.
"By any chance, did you folks travel through the Western Freeway?"
"Yes, we did. But why do you ask?"
"Your lady seems like she's seen a ghost. Did anything happen to you while traveling on that road?"
The old man's questions were a little intrusive, but I saw deep concern on his face, so I finally told him everything we'd experienced. He listened to us patiently, all while shooting worried glances at Lisa.
"You did good, son. Took your girl and left the damn place. No people of this town drive on that road after sunset, as there's a legend associated with that forest. This is a story my grandma told me. Back in the day, there lived a witch in that forest, and with her magic, she captured a villager and turned him into a child-eating monster. Since then, whenever people traveled on that road at night, the monster used to kill the traveling people and take the kids back to the witch by strapping them on his body. As years passed, the attacks reduced, but people driving on that road at night experienced weird things and heard cries of women begging for the lives of their kids. Now, I know you educated folks may think of this as nothing more than a nighttime story, but sometimes it's better to believe in things than to play with fire. I'll get your orders ready soon. Don't bother with the cash. It's on the house. Your kids have had enough already."
Then he walked away, and we had our food and slept in our van. The next day, we drove out of that town, and we came back home, ending our road trip once and for all. We valued our life more than the adventure and thrill of the road. But you know what the worst part was? When we got home and I reviewed the footage from that night, I saw an ugly fat face peeking from behind one of the trees. That monster is still out there.
My name is Timothy Malone, and this is a story about how a fast food restaurant I barely went to nearly ended my life in just one visit. One night, about 4 months ago, my girlfriend Monica and I had been out with some friends until around 11 p.m. On our drive, we both talked about how we were extremely hungry and would like to find something to eat. Not long after, we found a Wendy's close by, and although I had only been to Wendy's a few times, we parked and walked in to get some food. Now at the time, there was no one else in the restaurant, except one single employee who was working that night. The employee was a middle-aged man with a beard. He looked extremely skinny for his age, and his eyes were glassy and looked like he had been on some sort of drug. After we walked in, my girlfriend decided she was going to use the restroom, leaving me alone with the man to order. As I ordered our meals, something about the man seemed frightening to me. He uncomfortably held eye contact, and not once did he say a single word. I figured I was just being paranoid, as strangers always seemed creepier to me at night. About 15 minutes passed, and I began to worry as my girlfriend still hadn't come back from the toilet. So I decided to go check and see if she was okay. I knocked on the door, but there was no response from Monica. I was about to go in when I noticed flashing lights coming from the crack under the door, and not long after, Monica walked out, pale-faced, with dead eyes. "Hey, what took you so long? Are you okay?" I said. Monica simply walked past me and back to where our food was. I immediately followed her and stood in front of her to make sure she was fine. Monica still didn't respond to me. She simply looked over at the man, and they both shared an eerie, strange look, as if they had an understanding of sorts. That's when Monica suddenly grabbed a knife from across the counter and swung it at me, cutting my chest. I was completely shocked and in pain as I let out a loud scream. Monica then began to swing the knife frantically at me, cutting me on my arm a couple of times. I eventually managed to grab her arm and hit the knife out of her hand before hitting her on the head and saying, "What are you doing?" Me hitting her seemed to snap her out of whatever trance she was in, and before I could even begin to contemplate what had just happened, the Wendy's employee quickly ran to the back and out of the store. After talking with Monica and explaining what had happened, Monica informed me she couldn't remember even walking out of the toilet and decided to look in the toilet. We walked in to check what was in there, and I discovered the source of the flashing lights I had seen earlier was an old box TV that had a weird video on loop. The video displayed different random shapes, colors, and images. We quickly called the police, and in a few minutes, they arrived. The head officer in charge was shocked by our story. He explained that in the first place, that particular Wendy's was supposed to be closed throughout the week, and the man we had described did not have any prior records that might lead them to him. He also explained some form of hypnosis had been used on Monica, but until they took the time to look deeper into that, there was nothing much he could do. We drove back later that night, paranoid and worried about the strange man following us. Ever since that day, neither my girlfriend nor I have been to another Wendy's fast food restaurant. And quite frankly, we never will. It may seem obvious to say, but it's not easy to lose a loved one. At that moment, everyone thinks they understand you, that they have the right words to say to you, or that you can just pretend that nothing happened to you. I lost a loved one more than 5 years ago. At first, everyone was there for me and supported me. But as time went by, I started to get strange looks. None of them told me directly, but they all wondered how after all this time, I still couldn't stop thinking about Angela, my ex-girlfriend. I understand why they think this 5 years is a long time. What they don't know is that the reason I'm not over Angela is because she visits me. And to be honest with you, her intentions are never good. I'll be honest, my relationship with Angela was never very good. We had our first year of love, as all couples do, but it quickly evolved into what I considered a nightmare. On the one hand, I loved her. She was my partner, and I had this strange feeling that there would be no life after her, as happens to everyone with their first partner. On the other hand, being with Angela was really very difficult. She was very jealous and possessive. Even at the end of the relationship, she was very violent. I never got angry with her because I knew she had depression, and I did everything I could to get her to seek professional help. But there was no case. She was in total denial. All this kept escalating until one day, well, let's say she decided not to be with us anymore. I admit that I felt guilty for a long time. I felt that I could have done something more, and I felt that maybe I was to blame. But with time and therapy, I was able to solve it. What I couldn't resolve was what started to happen after that night. That night, I was at home alone. During that time, I was living in the house of my aunt and uncle, who went to live in another country, and therefore, they left the house for me. It was a very big house for one person, although I enjoyed the space. When it all started, I was on Facebook. That day was the anniversary of Angela's death, and I couldn't think of her again. I was meeting another girl 2 months ago, so I decided it was time to get over Angela. I went on her Facebook profile and deleted her from my friends. Hello? Scared after answering the phone. Hey, it's me. I was thinking, do you want to go see a movie tomorrow? Since you told me you're getting a little busy, we could spend the night together. Oh, yeah, sure. What's wrong? Are you all right? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a little disconnected. You're on her profile, right? Hey, you can't keep doing this to yourself. I know. So, tomorrow night? Yes. Make sure you're not late again. I'll be near the cinema because I have to take my sister to work. I'll buy the popcorn while you're coming. Cool. I love you. Love you too. See you tomorrow. Once I ended the call, I was ready to close Facebook. But something caught my attention. Suddenly, a chat window opened up. When I saw the message, it said the name Angela Thompson. And it said she was online. What? This must be a mistake. Instantly, the indicator that Angela was typing popped up, and her message froze me in my tracks. Why did you delete me? I don't know how to explain what I felt at that moment. My body froze, and a horrible feeling of sadness and confusion invaded my whole body. This could not be real. There was no way it could be real. I closed the chat window, but suddenly it opened up again with a new message. Who were you talking to? Was she the one who told you to delete me? Desperate, I closed the chat and tried to close the Facebook window, but I couldn't. The computer wasn't responding. The computer was not responding to me. Every time I pressed the X to close Google Chrome, the screen became more and more distorted. Each time this happened, I could see Angela's face in her profile picture getting closer and closer to the screen, as if it wanted to get out of the profile picture box. In desperation, I unplugged the computer, and that's when it was over. The screen was black. I'll be honest, at that moment I was confused, scared, and terrified. I didn't know what had just happened. Should I leave the house? Should I destroy the computer? Shut down Facebook? All I knew was that I couldn't stay one more second in this huge, dark house. I went to get a glass of water to catch my breath. Then I would call my girlfriend and tell her to spend the night with me. I didn't know the parents yet, but we could go to a hotel. I drank a glass of water and got ready to leave the house. I went to my room to get my cell phone, but as soon as I walked in, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The computer. The computer was on again. I looked for the computer cable, and it was still disconnected. But that wasn't the scariest thing. The scariest thing was that Facebook was open, and on it, Angela's profile picture. Only there was a slight change. Angela was not in her profile picture. It was her usual profile, but without her. I tried to leave, but the door was closed. At what point had I closed it? The door usually makes a lot of noise when it closes. How come I didn't hear it? When I looked forward again, my attention was no longer on Facebook, but on what was next to the computer. Out of the darkness, a dark silhouette with long hair began to form. I tried to turn on the lights, but they didn't work. The two lamps had broken at the same time. The silhouette started to walk towards me, and when it advanced far enough, I could recognize it. It was Angela, but her body was gray, almost blue. She had a horrible and intense mark on her neck. I was terrified to understand what that mark meant. Desperate, I pounded with all my might on the door, hoping it would magically open. But I knew it wasn't going to happen. I fell to the floor crying and surrendered to whatever the spirit would do to me. I froze as she put her hand on my neck and began to squeeze me violently. The strength in her arm increased and increased. I had no will to fight or resist. I just cried, hoping it would end as soon as possible. I knew I was not to blame for what happened to Angela, but I still couldn't stop feeling sorry for her. Before I lost consciousness, I heard Angela's voice whispering to me. "You are mine. You always will be." That was the last thing I heard before I passed out. When I woke up, I was in my bed, covered. I had a mark on my neck, very similar to Angela's. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked in the mirror, and besides the mark, I had a kiss on my forehead. The kiss mark hurt. It wasn't lipstick. It was a bruise. That day I tried to contact my girlfriend, but she never answered. Every time I contacted her, she cut me off and blocked me from all social networks. Once I passed her on the street and I talked to her, but she just kept walking. I used to think she was angry because of something I didn't know, but after I passed her on the street, I understood everything. She wasn't angry. She was terrified. After that evening, I stopped trying to communicate with her. I didn't want to drag her into whatever it was that was haunting me. It's been a while since that night. I've never been in a relationship with anyone, and I've slowly moved away from my friends. Whenever I am with someone, I feel their presence. I feel that Angela is close, watching me. Sometimes I even see her silhouette in the dark, stalking me. She doesn't want me to be with anyone, only with her. Today, she is still stalking me. I don't really know what to do or how to get rid of her. I just know that whatever I do, I will have to do it alone. Have you ever had to close a food restaurant on the last shift? My name is Alex, and it happened to me while working at Taco Bell. This Taco Bell was pretty special though. Since it was located in a very secluded town, I'd say it even operated by its own set of rules. Unlike the city Taco Bell, here we had fewer employees because, truth be told, we didn't need them. I was the newest of the bunch, and honestly, I liked the job. I had a good group of people, and everyone was very patient with me, even though I was a little clumsy. Everything was going well. I was learning the job very quickly, until one night, I was assigned to the night shift. Since the restaurant was so small, only one person stayed on the night shift to close it, and since I had already been working there for a few months, they trusted me. Closing the place wasn't hard. Just giving everything a final cleaning, putting up the chairs, and locking up. I didn't even have to worry about closing the cash register because that was done by a colleague before leaving. The only rule we had to respect without exception was that we had to leave before 11:15 p.m. It was forbidden. I mean, absolutely forbidden to stay on the premises after midnight. To tell the truth, I thought it was something bureaucratic, but I knew it was more to it than that. The manager used to be a very permissive and carefree person, but regarding this issue, he was categorical. When I asked the rest of the employees what the reason was for this, they seemed to know the answer, but they didn't want to tell me. They would always tell me that it was better to just obey him, that someday they would tell me. I closed a few times on the night shift, always obeying the one rule of not going overtime. So I was trusted with the night shift more and more. Everything was going well until one fateful night, when by trusting me and not understanding that the time limit was put in place to protect me, I put my life at risk as I had never done before. That night, the restaurant was full. There was so much work. Luckily, my coworkers helped me. They moved several of my tasks forward so I could leave on time. When they left and the tables began to empty, I must admit that I made a terrible mistake. When cleaning the ice cream machine, I accidentally broke it, and the ice cream started pouring out nonstop. To make matters worse, while trying to fix the ice cream machine, I kicked the bucket, flooding the entire restaurant. I felt like the clumsiest person in the world. I couldn't let this mess stay until tomorrow, or I would surely get in trouble. Just for that night, I decided to stay a little longer to tidy up and pretend nothing had happened. My idea was to go over the deadline, but still finish before midnight. I hurried as fast as I could and finished cleaning up pretty quickly. I went on, and before I knew it, I was done. There was just one little problem. Oh no, it's 12:15. I wasn't going to tell anyone that this had happened to me, but at the same time, I couldn't stay in the restaurant for another minute. I tried to run to my locker to grab my things, but I tripped on the wet floor and fell to the ground. I hurt my arm in the fall, but that was no big deal. It was just a fall. The only problem was that it wasn't at all, because when I raised my head, something had changed. Suddenly, the good vibes in the restaurant disappeared, giving way to an atmosphere of enormous discomfort and the feeling that something was wrong. I don't know how to explain this. It was as if the air had changed. It was as if something was there with me, and that something was very oppressive. Scared, I raised my head. And that's when I saw it. A human figure, or at least it looked like one. But something was wrong. Its eyes were completely black, absorbing all the light around it, and its body seemed to be withered impossibly. I blinked several times, thinking it was an illusion. Maybe there was a gas leak. Maybe I hurt my head without realizing it. The only thing I knew was that no matter what or who was still there, I should move away, because what was in front of me looked very real, and I didn't want to be a victim of that horrendous being. Before I could try to rationalize what was happening, I could see that the shadow began to move slowly in my direction. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it would burst out of my chest. I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. I backed away slowly, frozen with fear. That figure was moving its legs, but it had no reason to do so since it was floating. Little by little, it began to get closer and closer. Something prevented me from running, as if this twisted and horrifying being was doing something to me. With a lot of effort, I managed to get up from the ground and try to walk, but things got even worse. Suddenly, I began to feel a strange pressure on my knee. The pressure became stronger and stronger and unbearable, and when I couldn't take the pain anymore, in a single second, my knee broke. I felt I had no more salvation. I started to crawl to the exit while crying in pain, praying that I had enough strength to make it alive for someone to save me. When I almost reached the exit door, my body froze completely. That being that was behind me got too close to me, and now he was only a few centimeters away from me. Having me at its mercy, the monster made a hand movement, and suddenly, I began to choke. It was as if my throat had temporarily stopped. No air was coming in or going out. I felt like I was going to die that very day. Suddenly, and to my rescue, the entrance door next to me opened violently, and without hesitation, he grabbed me and dragged me out of the room. Seeing his face, I realized it was someone I knew. It was my manager. I told you to get out before midnight. Wasn't I not clear enough? What? What was that? We don't know what it is. We only know that it arrives at midnight and attacks whoever is in the place. But how come no one knows? How is this place still open? This is a secret. If you tell anyone, we'll all be out of work. Understand? But it's dangerous. Listen to me. We give work here to a lot of people who need it. Most of your colleagues have a family. We need this place. And as long as we respect the rules, nothing bad will happen. My manager's logic may be strange, but I must admit that I partly understood it. The situation of my coworkers and the people in this town is not the best, so having a place like Taco Bell is very good. Besides, I've been here for several months, and to be honest, nothing has ever happened to me before. I kept working there, but I learned to respect the rules. Every night at 11:15 p.m., I would leave everything ready to leave quickly when the time came. It didn't matter if there was any work to be done. I never encountered that entity again. But the lesson was clear. There are things in this world that we cannot understand, and sometimes it is better not to challenge the unknown. Since then, my mental clock has been set to leave any place before midnight.
How many of you like horror? I don't mean watching movies or playing horror video games. I mean defying the paranormal, doing extreme things to look for fear, like playing Ouija, doing urban explorations, and really taking risks in the face of the paranormal. Which of you really likes horror? I always considered myself a big horror fan, but there was always something that bothered me. What if it wasn't real? So I dedicated myself to challenging the paranormal, to prove the existence of something else. Not because I challenged the genre, but because I trusted it, because I knew I could have the ultimate horror experience. I asked for more than I could handle. After spending a lifetime searching for things I wasn't supposed to see, I never thought that the worst thing that could happen was to achieve my goal, since by that very fact, I would be faced with a situation that no living being should ever have to face. It all happened on a Friday night. My parents asked me to spend the weekend at their house to take care of their dog while they were away. I had moved a few years ago, and since the place I was renting was pretty small, I liked the idea of being in a bigger house for a change. But you know what the best thing about it was? That I would finally have enough space to play Daruma-san, also known as the bath game. I won't bore you with the details and get right to the action. Unlike many other games, Daruma-san is really difficult to play, since not following the rules can make the game never happen, or even worse, make it work, but have Daruma-san attack you sooner than expected. I turned off all the lights in the house and immediately started playing. The first thing I did was fill the bathtub with water and lie down in it. As the game says, I began to wash my hair with my eyes closed, completing the ritual with what I had to say. Daruma-san fell down. 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 Just as the game anticipated it would happen to me, strange images began to gather in my brain. It was a woman coming out of the bathroom and slipping. As I opened my eyes, I thought for sure this was something out of my imagination. If the game says that I would imagine a woman stumbling out of a bathtub, it's obvious that I would imagine it, with or without something paranormal in the middle. As soon as I finished washing my hair, it all started. Suddenly, I felt like something was watching me. I don't know how to explain it to you. Maybe even what I felt at that moment doesn't make sense, but what my body felt, well, that made a lot of sense. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to confirm that what was watching me behind me was real, but I couldn't do it. The rules of the game said that I couldn't turn around and that I couldn't open my eyes no matter what. At that moment, I had no choice but to hold my curiosity and keep playing. After this question, the terrifying atmosphere around me became denser than ever. I was shivering at the thought of staying one more second in this bathtub. Luckily, the game was over, at least for tonight. Without opening my eyes, I got out of the bathtub without slipping, didn't let the water seep in, and went to sleep without turning on any lights. After all I did, the real game should start when I opened my eyes the next day. I must admit that although the game had not yet fully begun, that was the most traumatic night of my life. I spent the whole night having nightmares about a woman who came looking for me. That woman was missing an eye, just like Daruma-san. Throughout the whole dream, she didn't want to actively catch me. Once I woke up, I looked at myself in the mirror, somewhat asleep. As I gradually woke up, I remembered what I had done the night before. In case you don't know, Daruma-san is not about inviting a spirit into your bathtub. No. Daruma-san consists of summoning a spirit that during the next day will do everything possible to kill you. Immediately after remembering this, I began to feel the same thing I had felt the night before when I was in the bathtub. It was as if something was behind me, watching me, looking for the right moment to hurt me. According to the game, I was supposed to continue my normal routine that I would do any day. But this wasn't just any day. I was at my parents' house on a weekend. I had nothing to do and nowhere to go. Just staying at home, taking care of the dog or going out to buy something. I admit that part of me still thought this couldn't be real. Technically, I hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. I had just felt things that might not be there. I relaxed and decided to go watch TV. Real or not, I had nothing else to do. I lay down on the couch, attentive to everything that could be around me. Any shadow seemed suspicious. And I came to think, if it was real, Daruma-san could be anywhere. All the tension I was feeling soon began to fade, as I saw no one. Within minutes, I was distracted by a TV show, and soon after I fell asleep. I knew I had just woken up, but the way I slept, having so many nightmares, a few extra hours of sleep wouldn't hurt. Ah! I always had very strong nightmares, and I always woke up with some sleepiness, but this I had seen, even for a fraction of a second, was real. I looked around, but Daruma-san was no longer there. On the other hand, something had changed. The house felt different from the way it had an hour ago when I had fallen asleep. Although it was still sunny outside, it was still very cold. I felt a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that wouldn't let me breathe. It was as if the spirit was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Somewhat confused, I stood up, disoriented, trying not to fall. I immediately realized that I had to finish the game as soon as possible. Otherwise, the spirit would kill me. I tried as hard as I could to remember the rules, but everything was a blur. I couldn't think. Was this a coincidence? Was it because I was nervous? Or maybe something was doing this to me? Think. The rules. She will always appear behind me. If I turn around and get to see her, all I have to do is say, "Kita," and she'll be gone. I was very nervous, regretting playing this game and thinking that I might die that night. But somehow I managed to stay calm and use logic to survive. I stood against the wall. She couldn't attack me if I saw her. The air was getting heavy again. To my surprise, Daruma-san appeared in front of me, without any concealment at all. Her very presence chilled my blood. She was very difficult to see, as she was covered by a mist that hid a large part of her body. Her hair was black, and her skin was white and intense. She looked dead, and indeed she was. She approached slowly, floating and disorienting with every centimeter she advanced. When I was about to say the word to win the game, I realized I couldn't speak. This was not nerves. I felt something that did not allow me to speak. As I touched my throat, I could feel a lump in it. I was choking. As I struggled to breathe, Daruma slowly approached me. With every inch she took, the atmosphere became heavier. and I found it harder and harder to breathe. My vision was getting blurry. I was about to faint. Maybe this was for the best. I would rather have lost consciousness before Daruma-san caught me. My eyes started to close until suddenly I heard something. Slowly and indifferently, I could see Daruma-san turn her eyes to the dog. She was about to look at me again, but during that second, I realized something. I could breathe again. Kita! I had made it. Daruma-san was gone. I won the game. In shock, I fell to the floor and began to cry. From that day on, I never again risked provoking the paranormal. I started watching horror movies and playing video games. Sometimes some friends tell me to go on urban explorations, but I always say no. I don't need to go looking for ghosts anymore. I don't need to go looking for ghosts anymore. I've seen more than I was willing to see in a lifetime.
Everyone tells me that I should never get involved with the deep web. They tell me that it is a very dark place and that only bad things can come from it. Some people have even blamed me for the story I'm about to tell, as if I had anything to do with what happened. To those people, I always say the same thing. Do you know the worst thing about the deep web? Even if you don't do anything about it, even if you don't know it exists, you can get entangled in it. You can be its victim. And that is exactly what happened to me. I will tell you how it happened. My story begins on a field trip with my buddies. We were all scouts, and although we were an adult troop, we were only 18-year-old boys accompanied by an instructor. That day, we were just going to untie knots, make a campfire, and tell ghost stories. And that's exactly how the day started. We set up our tents around a circle where we were going to eat marshmallows later in the evening. Some of us were in charge of looking for wood. Others had to go exploring, and one of us, usually the most experienced, would guide us with a map. Our camp was in a remote location, far from civilization and any kind of cell phone signal. This meant we were completely isolated, which sounded exciting at the time, but soon became our worst nightmare. The campsite was near a small stream, surrounded by tall trees that blocked the view of the starry sky. We pitched our tents. When we all returned from our chores, we got down to work and began to prepare everything for the night. A few hours later, we had all the tents ready and a fire going, so we started cooking our rations. The night went on like any other camping trip, with laughter and jokes among friends. However, as the darkness closed in on us, we began to feel a strange uneasiness in the air. That's when we heard the sound of rustling branches in the distance. We all became alert, thinking it was a wild animal. The instructor said to wait and went to investigate. We all listened, and within seconds, someone was coming from his direction. But what emerged from the trees was not the instructor. Several men dressed in black, wearing masks that hid their faces, appeared out of nowhere. One of them held a camera, while the other carried some kind of rusty axe. The rest were carrying guns, and they were pointing them at us. We were paralyzed with fear and surprise. The intruders slowly approached us, staring at us through their masks. One of them spoke in a voice that sounded distorted and mechanical. They ordered us to get up and walk toward the stream. With no other choice, we obeyed, feeling like we were trapped in a never-ending nightmare. As we walked toward the creek, the intruders made us form a circle. They stared at us, their eyes hidden behind masks. Then the man with the axe began to speak in a voice that chilled our blood. He explained that we were a part of a macabre live show being broadcast on the deep web. We had been randomly chosen to be the victims of his twisted fun. Our hearts were pounding and anxiety gripped us. The man with the camera began to record us, pausing at each of our faces. We knew we were being filmed for an unknown audience in some dark corner of the web. Tears began to gather in our eyes, but we knew that crying would only make our situation worse. The deep web psychopath explained to us the rules of the macabre game we were about to play. Only one of us would make it out of that night alive. and the rest of us would disappear into the depths of the forest. The man placed a bottle in the middle of the ground and began to spin it to determine who would be the first to die. The bottle finished spinning and pointed to one of my friends. The intruders grabbed him and dragged him into the dark forest. I still remember my friend's screams. He was desperately calling for help, shouting that if we all got together, we could attack the men. Otherwise, we were all going to end up dying. You know, I still think about his words a lot. To tell you the truth, he was right. If we had listened to him, most of what happened that night could have been prevented. But can you blame us for not acting? We were only 18 years old. We had never had any real problems in our lives, and suddenly we were facing men from the deep web who wanted to play with us, torture us, and kill us. We could do nothing to stop them. We could only hear our friends' screams and terror fading in the distance. I admit that we all stared at each other. Some were thinking of attacking them. Others wanted to escape. But in reality, we were all frozen with fear. We were all convinced that there would surely be more people in the woods watching us, waiting for one of us to attack or try to escape. Hesitantly, we continued to listen to the sounds of our friends wailing, which would haunt us for the rest of the night. Meanwhile, the man with the axe looked at the rest of us and said that only one would escape. The rest would suffer the same fate. Time passed slowly and panic set in. We didn't know whether to try to flee or stay and wait for our turn to come. Finally, another bottle throw pointed to another one of my friends. They led him into the woods, and this time, we heard no screams. Just an eerie silence that left us even more terrified. As the night progressed, the intruders continued to pick off our friends one by one. Each time one of them disappeared, a sense of helplessness and despair grew in me. I knew that the possibility of being next was increasing, and my fear became unbearable. At one point in the night, none of us thought about escaping. The idea of being the last one alive started to become more and more attractive to all of us who were left. It was going to be harder and harder to resist or escape. We could only play by their rules. Without realizing it, we all became a herd of frightened sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Finally, there were only two of us left, my best friend Mark and me. The man with the axe looked at us with a sinister smile and informed us that it was now our turn to play. He gave us a choice. We could fight each other to the death, and the survivor would be free, or we could refuse and face an even worse fate. Mark and I looked at each other with terror in our eyes, knowing we had no choice. The fight was brutal and heartbreaking. We were not killers, we were friends. But the life at stake forced us to fight until one of us lay motionless on the ground. Blood mixed with mud and the sound of our blows echoed in the night. Neither of us was really fighting. We were just two teenagers punching each other and crying. Every punch I hit Mark with was like hitting myself, and I could see in his eyes that the same thing was happening to him. You know, I've known Mark my whole life. He was the first guy I talked to on my first day of high school, and since then, we've always been inseparable friends. Mark was like a brother I was trying to beat to save my own life. If either of us had really wanted to take the other one down, we could have done it very easily. But all our blows were like content. We both wanted to survive, but neither of us could bring ourselves to drop everything. And the Axeman knew it. I could see in his face how he was getting impatient, and when the man with the camera spoke to him, he only got angrier. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see how the Axeman grimaced and prepared to come at us. I knew what this meant. The fight was boring him. In that moment of desperation, I stopped thinking about Mark and thought about my parents. I thought about how devastated they would be if anything happened to me. I thought about my father, who would blame himself for my death since he insisted that I come. At that moment, I closed my eyes and hit Mark as hard as I could while crying and closing my eyes. Mark was instantly defeated, and the man with the axe was surprised but began to laugh. The man with the axe came up to me and congratulated me for surviving. He told me that I could leave. The man not only told me that I could tell the story, but he threatened that if I didn't tell the story, terrible things would happen to me and my family. So I was left to go, alone and traumatized in the middle of the dark forest. I ran without looking back, aimlessly, until I found a path that led me back to civilization. I arrived at a police station and told them what had happened. However, the police could find no trace of the deep web psychopaths or my missing friends. The deep web is a dark and mysterious place, difficult to trace. You know, sometimes I feel like I have to do something, like look for them and get revenge for what happened to Mark. But inside, I know they are just fantasies. I have no choice but to live like a coward. A coward whose family is alive and plans to keep them that way. It was a bald, wrinkled, almost blue head. Its eyes were huge and white, and as it looked at me, it had a smile from ear to ear that chilled my blood. Have you ever done urban explorations? You see, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not interested in generating content from this, and I don't even want to become famous. I just enjoy getting into places where other people wouldn't go. To tell you the truth, I never believed in the paranormal, and that's not what I was looking for in these explorations. And that's why I can tell you this story, as I spent months thinking I had gone crazy. It all started on a camping day. I had planned to do an exploration of the forest. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was just going to spend the night in the woods. None of my friends could go, but I had no problem with that. It wasn't my first exploration alone, and it wasn't going to be my last one either. Or so I thought. I spent the whole day going deep into the heart of the forest. I didn't really know what I would find, but I knew that there were no animals too dangerous or anything like that, since I always investigated where I go. When I got deep enough into the forest, I noticed that it was starting to get dark. So I made my camp and set up camp in a part that I saw as fairly open and free of trees. I ate quickly and went to sleep when it was still quite early. As the sun was rising before 6 a.m., I wanted to get up early and with lots of energy. I closed my eyes slowly, and before I knew it, I was asleep. When I opened my eyes, I felt something was wrong. I'm not a deep sleeper, but I can sleep through the night if no one wakes me up. And that night, something woke me up. The night seemed normal and quiet, but something was wrong. Call it a feeling, experience, or whatever, but I knew someone was there. Looking out at the pasture in front of me, I watched as something moved unnaturally. The wind wasn't blowing and it didn't seem to be an animal. Someone was watching me. It's not the first time I've been in danger, but I've never encountered anything like this before. A stalker whose face or intentions I did not yet know was watching me. Faced with this discovery, I did the most logical thing I could think of. I grabbed my flashlight, a knife I had at my side, and went into the opposite direction to where the grass was moving. In that camp, I didn't have anything too expensive. I could go look for it the next day if there was anything left. In one swift move, I took off at high speed towards the pasture and started running as fast as I could. I didn't know exactly where we were, but I had a good idea of it. As I ran away, I could hear someone behind me chasing me, but the footsteps got lost little by little until they ended up disappearing. I walked a little more looking for a place to hide, and that's when it hit me. In front of me was an abandoned building under construction. It was strange for all the things outside. It looked like a hospital. But what was a hospital doing in the middle of nowhere? Why was it abandoned? Whatever the reason, it was a good hiding place from whoever was still walking near me, so I decided to go in and hide until I was sure this person wasn't following me anymore, or just that it would be daylight. Once inside, I realized that the place was fuller than I thought. Why would they leave a place like this half-built? I explored the abandoned hospital, trying to get as far into it as possible. I wasn't really afraid of what might be inside the hospital, but it was the man who was stalking me outside that really terrified me. Behind a closed double door, there were lights. How was this possible? How did the energy get here? Why was it coming? Where was I? I admit that curiosity got the better of me, and I walked to the door. Once I opened it, I was met with a new surprise. Behind the closed door, there were no people. There were no guards, and they were not performing any experiments or anything I could expect. It was just a hallway with light. I walked a little inside this corridor, considering going into one of these doors to hide. If that person who was stalking me saw this place, he would surely think there were guards and would not want to enter. I walked in with a big smile, thinking that the worst had already happened and that surely this person could not do anything, when something in front of me made me stop in my tracks and fall to the floor with fright. One of the doors to the lighted corridor was open. Behind that door, there was no light, just gloom. Normally, this would not be the striking thing. The whole hospital except that room was dark. What really surprised me was that behind that terrifying door, someone was peeking out. For a moment, I thought it might have been a guard. It could also be my stalker or a simple homeless person who was living in the hospital. But no, this was something much worse. I'll never forget how I felt when my eyes came face to face with whatever that was. It was a bald, wrinkled, almost blue head. Its eyes were huge and white, and as it looked at me, it had a smile from ear to ear that chilled my blood. I didn't know what this was, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen in my life. At that moment, the first thing you think of is to run. Run as fast as you can and leave it behind. Would you believe me if I told you that I didn't? In that situation, I was so scared that my body became totally paralyzed, falling to the floor in panic and possibly victim to whatever it was that was in front of me, looking at me very calmly. As if knowing that I could not move, that being came out the door and walked slowly down the hallway towards me. His body was tall, gangly, and skeletal. His bones seemed to be disproportionate and senseless, but he still walked towards me without any problems. What struck me most was the way he walked. I'm still terrified thinking about it. The steps of this being were irregular and difficult, as if it was suffering every step it took. It was strange. It was walking like any other person, but something about that walk seemed forced. It was as if that thing that was coming towards me was trying to walk, trying to be human, trying to make me think that I could be calm because I had another human in front of me. Seeing something so horrible filled my body with energy, and instead of using it to fight this being, I used it to run. I ran and ran and ran. I was so desperate that I didn't realize that I was still in an abandoned place. Since I entered, my life never stopped being in danger. Not by ghosts, psychopaths, or accusers, but by myself. As I was escaping from the being in that hallway, I fell down the escape hatches and ended up on the floor below. My body hurt a lot, and it was impossible for me to get up. But even so, I made every effort humanly possible to get out of that area. To keep going down the stairs and get out of there as soon as possible. But it was no use. Because of the blow I had at that moment, it was impossible for me to keep my concentration enough to keep from fainting. And so, as I closed my eyes and saw something or someone crawling near me, my eyes were much heavier than before. And when I closed my eyes, I fainted. When I woke up, it was already daylight. My body hurt a lot, and I still had the wounds from falling off the ladder. I went back to check the area that was lit, but now, not only was there no light coming from under the door, but the door was locked with chains. To tell the truth, it didn't bother me much either. Anyway, I had no plans to set foot in that area again. When I managed to escape, the first thing I did was to tell the police everything. Once I did, they all told me that what happened to me at the hospital was probably a lie. the results of my nerves being harassed. It could even be the development of a mental illness that made me hallucinate. Whatever it was, I was sure that what I saw there was real. What the police were able to discover was the information about the man who was following me. Apparently, he was an ex-convict who had escaped from prison. This man never planned to hurt me, but he surely would have if necessary. Luckily, the police caught him a few meters after he ran into me, as he just kept running in a straight line. I still wonder what happened that day. Honestly, the older I got, the blurrier the whole story became. Let this be a lesson, to remember there are things beyond human understanding. Today, I'm afraid to go camping or to hospital. And I know that no one can judge me for it. The only thing I hope is that no other explorer ends up in that scary abandoned hospital again. Maybe I survived by being lucky, but who knows what that thing might do to the next person who walks in.
My name is Jacob Lane, and this is a detailed recollection of the horrifying events that went down on the 15th of August 2019 at Wendy's in Colorado. 3 months earlier, on the 20th of May, I applied for a job at my local Wendy's restaurant, as I needed a little money to help me with school. I got a job as a waiter and started working just 2 days later. Naturally, most of my co-workers were in their 20s, and it didn't take long for me to create a working bond with them, as well as a good relationship. A tradition I got introduced to at Wendy's was that, as the newest employee, it was arranged for me to get the later shifts, which meant I often had to lock up late after everyone left. In weeks when I had tests or exams, however, they would let me get the earlier shifts so I could study. It also wasn't hard to arrange with someone else to take the late shifts if I wanted to go partying or hang out with other friends. Most of the time, though, I would end up working the late shifts, and it became a running joke for the co-workers to try and frighten me before leaving me alone in the restaurant. They would tell stories about how once in a while, the Wendy's girl would visit our restaurant in particular and stay for a while, as here's the only place she felt at home. They would say things like, "Jacob, tonight might be the night, huh? Maybe you'll get a visit from little Wendy herself." One day, I decided to ask where this rumor even started from. Alex, one of my co-workers, ended up telling me the origin of the story.
"Well, none of us actually know if it's true. I mean, it obviously doesn't make any sense, but Julia, the manager, told me when she first got here, the former manager wouldn't shut up about it. Told her the whole thing about Wendy coming here once in a while and to make sure to treat her right. Julia was creeped out for a while, but it's never actually happened, so no need to worry. I'm sure you'll be fine."
2 days before I officially quit my job, I was given the late shift once again. I didn't have any problems, however, as I didn't have any plans for the night, and there wasn't much I had to do for school. That night was slow, and barely anyone came in before 9 p.m. Eventually, at around 9:30, a group of high schoolers came in all rowdy and wasted. Their orders were a lot for me to handle, and they were very impatient, rude, and annoying. By the time they left, it was already 11:15, and my mood had been completely ruined. I began to clean up their dishes, and once I was done with that, I started tidying up the restaurant, thinking about nothing but my home and bed. Eventually, I began finishing up, so I put my AirPods in as I prepared to leave for the day. I was standing at the counter, and out the corner of my eye, I noticed the door open, but I didn't see anyone come in. I quickly took out my AirPods as I was sure of what I'd seen. And that's when I heard tapping coming from across the counter. I looked over the counter and was met with the sight of a little girl standing alone in the restaurant. The girl had tiny brown eyes, freckles, and bright ginger hair that was held apart by blue ribbons. At first, I didn't realize the obvious similarities she had with the Wendy's girl, as despite her look not being what you saw every day, there wasn't anything particularly odd about the little girl's physical features. Now, the way she was dressed, however, was a completely different story, as that was what revealed to me her identical similarity to the Wendy's girl. Everything she wore was the colors blue and white, from the dress to the socks to the shoes. The girl stood silently, looking directly at me. And in that moment, all I could think about was how tired I was and how that night wasn't the night for the guys to pull a prank on me. I walked to the other side of the counter to meet the child and said, "Yeah, kid, this is a nice outfit and all, but I'm not really in the mood for jokes. You can go tell the guys to come out from wherever they're hiding." I had expected a somewhat childlike reaction from the girl, but she simply said nothing and proceeded to walk over to a table before taking a seat. I was still in a very bad mood, and the child's silence was only adding to my frustration, so I walked out the door into the parking lot and said, "Very funny, guys, but now's not the time for this." I waited for someone to come out, but the parking lot remained completely silent, and the only sounds I could hear were crickets. I walked back in to find the child seated with a menu. She looked up as I walked back in and finally spoke.
"I want one of everything on this menu. You can take your time."
At that point, I was completely frustrated and annoyed, but a part of me was confused as to how the little girl didn't act or sound her age in any way at all. Nothing about her had the childish innocence all kids her age showed. Instead, she gave off a mature and dark vibe. She was still a child, however, and I wasn't going to serve her anything, so I said, "First of all, young lady, we closed 15 minutes ago, and secondly, I don't care what you want, so please get up and go home." The girl looked shocked and responded calmly with,
"I am home."
The look in her eyes as she said that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't entertain the situation anymore, and I didn't know what it was about her, but I suddenly had goosebumps all over my body. The child sat still as she stared into my eyes, and at that moment I realized it wasn't a joke, and I might lose my life if I didn't do what I was told. The girl looked away and finally broke the silence, saying,
"You shouldn't be rude to me in my home. You all need to learn to respect."
I walked away from her, completely confused as to how a child could make me frozen with fear. My mind immediately began to ponder the possibility of the jokes my coworkers told being true. All I knew was there was something very wrong with that child, and although I wasn't sure what it was, I knew it wouldn't be smart to stick around and find out. So I acted as if I was headed behind the counter, but I quickly burst out the front door and began running to the apartment complex down the street. As I ran away from Wendy's, all I could think of was, am I really running from a little girl? Those thoughts, however, were quickly justified as I heard a loud scream come from behind me, followed by rapid footsteps. I looked back to see Wendy running towards me at great speed with a large knife from our kitchen in hand. I kept running, but each time I looked back, she seemed closer and closer until eventually I felt a sharp pain through my leg, causing me to fall. The girl frantically crawled on top of me, stabbing my arm, legs, and shoulder, grunting heavily in the process. She eventually crawled up to face me. Her eyes remained still, dead, empty, and my blood had covered most of her freckles. The girl gripped my neck before saying, "You shouldn't be rude to me in my home. You all need to learn respect." She raised the knife to stab me again, but the headlights of a car pulling out of the apartment complex lit up the road I was lying on, and the driver screamed as soon as she saw what was happening. Before the driver could get out of the car to help, Wendy got off me and ran, straight into the darkness, disappearing just as quickly as she had appeared. The police and my boss arrived with the paramedics later that night, and after I told them my story, they came up with two possible conclusions. The first being that I was high on drugs and got into a fight with someone, and the second being that there was a crazy individual probably suffering from a type of dwarfism and skeletal dysplasia called SED, a bone growth disorder resulting in skeletal abnormalities that allowed her to pose as a child and carry out her crazy and twisted fantasy as the Wendy's girl. The cops explained this had happened before in the case of Barbara Skrlova, who posed as a 12-year-old girl named Annika in the Czech Republic. The woman who stopped to help corroborated my story and confirmed she also saw the little girl who was attacking me before running away. Her statement and the drug test I was given led the police to decide it was probably the second theory and put out a search warrant for the woman. I quit my job 2 days later, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself the police theory was right, I've always known, deep down, there was nothing normal about the eyes of the Wendy's girl I saw that night. Over the years, after hearing numerous horror cases and stories, I've come to realize there is also nothing normal about everyone's favorite fast food restaurant, Wendy's. This case is loosely based on the story of John Stugart, a Wendy's employee in the early 80s, who claimed to have had an encounter with the popular Wendy's mascot herself. The employee claimed that the child visited him late at night while working alone and attacked him when he tried attending to her. After further investigation, however, it was decided the employee was mentally unstable and he was put in a psychiatric hospital just 3 months later. Most records of this case were quickly discarded, which led many people, including myself, to ask the question, was he really mad, or was there something bigger going on? What could have been the truth about the night Stugart spent alone at Wendy's? And what could be the secret our favorite restaurant, Wendy's, doesn't want us finding out? For the last year, I've been a regular viewer of this channel, and let me tell you how happy I get when a new video pops up in my notification. I know a lot of you can relate to this. Being a truck driver, most of the time I'm on the road. These videos and music keep me entertained throughout my drives. But today, I'm going to share a true night driving horror story with you, and I hope you enjoy it. My name is Stefan, and for the past 8 years I've been a truck driver. I always enjoyed driving and being on the road, so when I was approached by my uncle to work as a driver in his transportation company, I jumped at the opportunity. I'm also a part of the truck driving community, and we all share our good as well as bad or terrifying experiences with each other. I too had seen my fair share of sketchy and illegal things on the road, but what happened to me that one time made me question everything. The company that I work for transports electronic goods, furniture, and other non-perishable items most of the time. There was one such delivery I had to do from South Carolina to North Dakota. It was December, so the atmosphere was already chilly, and driving through snow-covered roads is not my favorite part. However, I was requested to make this delivery by my uncle, as the other driver had taken sick leave. I reluctantly accepted to drive the goods, on one condition: that I would drive slowly and take my time delivering them. My uncle happily agreed, as the company was soon to be closing for Christmas. In my truckers community, I have a lot of drivers that had mentioned weird things happening on the way to North Dakota. Although I listened to all of them, I never really believed in the supernatural or the paranormal. I always thought those things were a result of your mind playing tricks on you. Not to mention the road life can be extremely lonely at times. On my third day of the drive, there was a snowstorm warning. I was just on the outskirts of North Dakota and had to call it a day. I always avoid driving in rough weather. Better to be late than dead. But this snowstorm was a hell of a lot worse than the ones I'd dealt with before. I'd planned to find truck parking and spend my time there, but the weather didn't permit me to go any further than a couple of miles. Finally defeated and tired of making my way through the snow-covered roads, I parked in a small clearing by the freeway. There was no chance I was getting out of the truck. Also, the sun was about to set, so I knew it would be pitch black soon. I did my regular drill, checked the back doors of the trailer and made sure everything was locked up, made sure all the tires weren't covered in snow, and locked the driver's and passenger side door, boarded up the front glass with a blackout curtain that I carry with me, and I shut the windows. I knew I had to keep the heating on in my truck if I wanted to sleep comfortably. Plus, I had to make dinner. By the time it was dark outside, I had eaten my dinner, a simple sandwich, relieved myself, and was ready to get some shut-eye. I lay in the makeshift bed behind the driver's and passenger seat, pulled a blanket over myself, and got comfortable. I knew it'd take a few minutes to fall asleep, so I decided to watch some of SSG Animation's scary videos on YouTube. I'm not sure when I fell asleep, but I jolted awake after hearing a sudden bang. It was as if someone had hit something hard and big against the rear of my truck. My phone was beside my bed and it was dark, inside and out. My first instinct was that maybe I'd had a dream, so I decided to go back to sleep, only to be woken up by another bang a couple minutes later. This time, however, I knew I wasn't dreaming. Someone or something was banging on my truck, and they were hitting hard against the steel. I had a couple of incidents of homeless people or straight-up thieves trying to steal stuff from my parked truck. But who would get here in the middle of the snowstorm with 2 or 3 feet of snow everywhere? Bang! Once again. Who the hell was it? I knew it was intentional, as no wild animal ever targets a big object repeatedly, and never in a snowstorm. But who would be daring enough to get out here in such a remote place and at that ungodly hour just to torment a truck driver? If it weren't snowing so much, I'd step out and confront the person or people. I always carried a small gun with me, just in case, so I wasn't afraid. But this time, something in my gut told me to stay inside and not react. However, I was curious, so I decided to film whatever was going on through my window. With my phone camera, I moved over from my bed to get closer to the window. As soon as I pointed my camera towards the exterior of the truck, I saw weird yellow eyes staring straight at me from the corner of my window. I was so scared that I stumbled back into my bed. I didn't make a single sound, as the only thing keeping me safe from the creature outside was the truck door and some breakable glass. I knew as soon as I saw the eye that this was no wolf or bear, nor was this any human or any animal for that matter. It was something else, something we didn't know about. I stayed tucked in my bed and kept recording as much as I could. Soon I spotted an ear of the creature, all while the bang continued. This meant there was more than one of these creatures. I knew I didn't stand a chance in front of one of these guys, not even with my gun, so the wise thing was to lay low and hope they'd leave me alone. Also, the battery of my phone was about to die, so I stopped recording and curled myself back in bed. Now the creatures were moving to the front of the truck, and I was terrified. I knew the only one who could save my life from the terrifying creatures outside was God. So I started praying while I hid beneath my blanket. The creatures banged on the doors and the hood of the truck. They were trying to open the doors to get in, but I had double locked them, a locking technique I'd learned very early on in my trucking career. Now, without my phone, I wasn't able to see anything outside. All I could do was hear the noises made by these creatures. This went on for at least an hour, after which the creatures got bored of my truck and left. That night, I didn't sleep one bit. I was wide awake in case the creatures returned, but they never did. The next morning after sunrise, I scouted the surroundings from the inside of my truck, and when I thought the coast was clear, I jumped out of the truck. I jumped straight into 4 feet of snow. There were no footprints on the ground for me to figure out if it was a human or an animal. However, as I moved towards the back of the truck, there were multiple dents in the steel, which resembled a powerful punch. Not scratched from an animal's paw or horns, but a human punch. Who would be strong enough to put such deep dents into a steel truck? I had no idea, but I decided to get the hell out of that place as soon as I could. Finally, I reached my destination by midday, and fortunately, the snow on the road had melted and the weather was pleasant. The people unloading the stuff from my truck had asked if I'd gotten into an accident, looking at all the dents on it. I told them what had happened, and they told me that no one dares to travel on that part of the freeway after sunset, and the people living in that region believe that a half-human, half-animal hybrid roams that area after sundown and attacks anything and anyone who comes across it. To date, no one has been able to catch or even get a photo of this animal, as it's as smart as a human and as strong as an animal. Then I showed the footage on my phone, and perhaps that was the only time someone had captured those creatures on camera. I don't know if I should consider myself lucky or extremely lucky. What do you think those things were? Werewolves? Humanoids or aliens? I, for one, have no clue what they were, and nor do I ever want to know.
I was alone in McDonald's one night, as usual, closing up shop after a long shift. It was a cold, rainy night, and the atmosphere in the restaurant was eerie. My coworkers had already finished their work and left, leaving me alone to take care of the final cleaning and closing tasks. The place was silent, with only the sounds of the rain pattering against the glass and the hum of the fluorescent lights. As I went about my chores, I began to feel a strange sensation, as if someone was watching me. As I was cleaning the tables and picking up the trash, I noticed that one of the chairs was slightly pushed out of its usual place. I went over to adjust it, thinking that someone might have moved it before leaving, but I didn't see anyone in the restaurant. As I finished picking up the trash in the table area, something else strange caught my eye. The cash register was open. I remember closing it after the last customer paid for his order. I cautiously approached it and closed it again, wondering if I had forgotten to do so. The feeling of being watched continued to grow, and now I felt more uncomfortable than ever. As I headed toward the kitchen to finish cleaning the fryer, I heard a noise coming from the bathroom area. I walked over and saw that the men's room door was opening and closing on its own, as if someone was inside. I froze for a moment, not knowing how to react. Could there be someone inside? Would there be anyone else in the restaurant besides me? With slow, fearful steps, I approached the bathroom door and carefully pushed it open. To my surprise, it was empty. There was no one there. The feeling that something strange was going on became more intense. I decided to quickly finish the cleaning and close the McDonald's. I headed to the kitchen, and as I was tending to the fryer, I felt an intense cold all around me. I looked toward the window and saw a blurry figure standing next to the soda machine. The figure was fuzzy, as if composed of shadows. I couldn't make out facial features, but I could feel its presence. My heart was pounding as I faced this terrifying sight. I decided to remain calm and not let fear overpower me. Surely there was an explanation for this, wasn't there? At that moment, I thought that none of this could be real. That day I was particularly tired. I had slept very little, and maybe I was still very suggestible from the horror movies I had seen the day before. I told myself that what had happened with the chairs and the cash register was just coincidence, and that surely the bathroom door was just the wind. All of that had been a suggestion, and surely now it was just my head playing tricks on me. In denial, but absolutely terrified, I finished cleaning the fryer, but the figure was still there, motionless. The atmosphere was filled with negative and hostile energy. I felt the air was tighter than ever, and I began to breathe with more and more difficulty. Confused, I looked back in the direction of the shadow, but something had changed. She was no longer there. At that moment, my heart almost stopped when I realized that the reason the shadow was no longer in that position was because it was next to me. It had no face or features. It was as if a shadow had taken on a corporeal state. It said nothing, but its mere presence communicated to me that I was not welcome. I felt trapped and frightened, not knowing what to do. I backed slowly toward the fryer, not taking my eyes off the figure. It was then that the entity began to move, approaching me slowly and intimidatingly. Every step I took filled me with terror. I tried to run away, but in a blink of an eye, I was in front of the fryer. Before I could react, my body began to move only towards the fryer, which was suddenly on, and even though I had pulled it out, it was full of oil. I struggled with all my might to avoid falling into it, but my head was getting closer and closer. By forcing myself, I could stop it temporarily, but still, with each passing second, I was closer to it. I could feel the drops of oil jumping towards my face, and the heat of the oil began to irritate my skin. The pain was unbearable, and I knew that if I gave in, my life would be in danger. I used all the strength I had in me, and with one last effort, managed to free myself from the entity. I fell to the ground, my skin reddened and burned by the heat of the fryer. I crawled from the fryer, feeling an intense pain on my skin. The shadowy entity was still there, watching me. My hands were shaking as I tried to get up, but my body was weakened by the effort and fear. Once outside, I thought the cold rain and wind would make my face stop hurting, but the opposite was true. My face burned so much, it was as if the oil was still on it, burning me more and more. I walked away from the restaurant and sought refuge in my car, where I felt a little safer. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down as I felt the burning of the burns on my face and hands. At that moment, I had the impression that if whatever the shadow was had wanted to kill me, it would have simply done it. I couldn't help but feel tiny, like I had encountered something far beyond my understanding, and the only reason I survived was by a quirk of fate. I decided not to return to the restaurant that night. Instead, I called the manager to explain what had happened and asked him to check the security cameras. At first, he thought it was a joke. Then he thought I was drunk. As I started the car, I looked into the restaurant through the windshield and saw that the entity was still there, standing at the emergency door staring at me. A few minutes later, the manager told me that the police had already gone to the area and found no one. He himself was in charge of closing the restaurant with the police nearby, and he didn't see anything either. When he heard me panic, he told me that the next day we should see the recordings and that today I would just rest. The next day, we both went to McDonald's and reviewed the security footage. My manager found out that everything I had told him was true. On the recording, we could see how I was struggling against myself to keep my head out of the oil, while a shadow was standing in front of me. There was no logical explanation for its origin or nature, but the manager confessed to me that other employees had warned him that they had seen a strange figure during the night. He naturally never believed the stories and thought it was an inside joke the night shift employees had on him. At that moment, he realized that everything he had been told was true. The figure seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. It simply appeared, until in a moment, out of nowhere, it disappeared again. The entity had completely disappeared. There was no sign of its presence, no footprints or traces. It was as if it had never been there. As I left the McDonald's, the manager told me to get urgent treatment for what happened to my face, because even after hours, it was still burning, and the few creams I had used at home had not worked. That was my last day working at McDonald's, and shortly after, I found out that it was closed for a few months. Part of me was relieved that something like that wouldn't happen to anyone else. But this didn't last long. A few months later, the restaurant reopened and life went on. A few times I went with my friends to eat, and sometimes I would see the same manager walking the aisles of the place. Every time the manager saw me at the tables, he would just look away. Possibly it was an embarrassment, as both he and I knew that another innocent employee would close the McDonald's on the night shift and was a potential victim of that entity, and he would do nothing to stop it. Now that Halloween is around the corner, I thought about sharing an incident that happened in the cul-de-sac community where I live. I'm Sabrina, and this story is based on a true incident. Last June, I married Ashton. We met on a dating app and things quickly progressed from there. When we got married, Ashton moved us into a house he had purchased a few years ago. The house was a pretty cozy home, something I had pictured myself living in. It was the fourth house in a cul-de-sac of 6 homes. In our area, there was a community of cul-de-sac homes. It was a safe neighborhood and I was very pleased to live there. Within a few months of our marriage, we became pregnant with our baby boy Max. In one of the other 5 houses in our cul-de-sac lived an old couple, and then the rest of the other 4 homes were occupied by small families like us. My favorite part of living in the cul-de-sac home was the little kids that played in our common circular driveway. Every time I tended to my front garden, I used to see these kids play together. Slowly, I became friends with them, and sometimes their parents used to ask me to keep an eye on the kids while they worked at home or ran errands. The oldest among them was Philip Martin, 10 years old, and then there was his little brother, Andy Martin, 8 years old. Then there was Gemma Chang, 9-year-old Asian girl. Then there was Bob Anderson, 8, who was in the same grade as Andy. And lastly, 9-year-old Jim Flenderson. All these kids were very close and also went to the same school. As it was my first Halloween there, and also because I was pregnant, I could not decorate the house as I wished to. The kids noticed the lack of decoration in our home and brought all the spare Halloween decorations they had and helped me decorate my house. By then, I felt like I was part of the cul-de-sac family. Unfortunately, Ashton, my husband, had to fly out of state for work, and so I was left alone in the house. I had brought some candy from the store earlier for all the kids who came trick-or-treating. I knew at some point these 5 little devils would come to my home asking for treats. Around 6 in the evening, my doorbell started ringing with all the kids coming for their share of candy. Although it was a delight seeing kids dressed as different characters or things, I was wondering who or what had my 5 little neighbors become for this Halloween. As I remember, they were hell-bent on wearing coordinated outfits. An hour or so later, my bell rang, and in front of my door were 5 kids dressed as a big bear, a bird, a rabbit, a kid, and a fox. And they all looked scary as their costumes were definitely not as cute as they were. What are you all supposed to be?
We are characters from a video game called Five Nights at Freddy's, which we all love to play very much. We are Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and BB.
Andy replied to me, who was dressed as the creepy fox. Their costumes resembled animatronics. You all look very scary. I complimented them with a smile and handed each one of them their share of candy. Now, after spending so much time with these kids, I knew them pretty well. Their body language, the way they spoke and interacted with one another. When I looked at all the kids again, I could easily make out who was hidden under which costumes. However, when Gemma walked up to me to get her candy, I noticed a slight difference in her behavior. I knew the girl was shy and talked only when spoken to. She was also very polite, as her dad had taught her good manners. When I dropped the candy in her basket, Gemma turned away and started walking behind the rest of the gang. That's when I was confident something was wrong. So I called after her. Hey Gemma, how you doing? Did you all go to all the houses in our area? Instead of replying immediately, as the little girl always did to me, she slowly turned around, nodded her head, and then ran behind the rest of the kids who had already reached the house of the old couple. I stood there on my porch watching Gemma. Suddenly, she appeared a little taller than usual. But kids grow fast, don't they? But the thing that bothered me the most was the fact that she had not said thank you to me when I gave her the candy. Gemma usually bowed and said thank you to anyone who gave her anything. It was an Asian thing her father had taught to her. Also, as she did not have a mother, she had become pretty close to me, as I was the closest thing to a mother the poor girl had. As I kept on observing Gemma, I noticed that she wasn't talking to her 4 best friends too. The 4 boys were chatting, joking, but for some reason, she wasn't part of the fun that night. Apart from me, the 4 boys and their families were the only people Gemma opened herself to. After a few minutes, the kids had collected candy from all the homes in our cul-de-sac and had walked to the other one. That's when I looked at Gemma's house, in which she lived with her dad. There on the top floor in her dad's bedroom was a silhouette of a man who quickly got away from the window as soon as I spotted him. He was at least 6 feet tall, which meant it wasn't Gemma's dad, who was around 5'4". Totally forgetting that I was pregnant, I went to Gemma's front porch and rang the doorbell. But no one opened the door. Something fishy was going on, and I knew deep down that the kids were unsafe. So I decided to call Mr. Chang. He picked up soon after the 3rd ring. I asked him where he was, who was in her house, and most importantly, what was going on with Gemma. He was a bit surprised by my line of questions and said that last night around 12:30, he had received a call that Gemma's grandma was ill, so he and Gemma drove to Wyoming to be with her grandma. So there was no one in the house, and in fact, Gemma was with him reading stories to her sick granny. This shook me to my core, and without thinking much, I called 911 and told them what had happened. But I knew the kids weren't safe. So instead of calling their parents, I ran towards them with my big pregnant belly and all. I yelled out to the boys, but none of them replied. Somehow, after asking a few passerbys if they had seen 5 kids wearing weird animatronic costumes, I found them in the local park, which was pitch dark so late in the evening. I yelled out to the boys again, but still no reply. Then I heard an ear-piercing scream and ran in the direction. There, behind the big bush, were all 4 boys. The heads of their costumes lay at a distance, and in front of them, with a gun and a big knife in hand, was a short man around 4'9" in height. He was dressed as a bird, the character who I thought was Gemma. He was holding the boys at gunpoint and had cut Andy in his leg. When he spotted me, he aimed the gun straight at my stomach. "Hey, please stop. Let the kids go, I beg you." He didn't say a word, just laughed out loud and fired the gun in the air. I and the kids instinctively covered our ears, and the man kept laughing like a maniac. While the man was fully focused on me and pointing the gun at my belly, I saw Philip, the eldest, get up and sneak behind the man with a large wooden plank he had found close by. I kept talking to the kidnapper and distracted him while Philip swung the plank on the man's head. Before the man could understand what was happening, he was on the ground, unconscious. But the gun fired and the bullet hit me in the shoulder. I still managed to walk to the unconscious man and pick up his gun. The kids had all huddled around me by then, gasping and crying, looking at all the blood. The cops soon got there after hearing 2 gunshots, and they had already arrested the tall man in Gemma's home. They arrested the unconscious kidnapper too. What had happened was, when Gemma and her father left early in the morning, these 2 thugs had seen them leave. They broke into their home and found Gemma's Chick the Bird costume. They planned on abducting the kids and then selling them to human traffickers. However, they did not expect me to stop in and save the kids. I'm just glad that I was able to save the children. But now that I think about it, do I want to raise my little Sam in such an unsafe environment? Hello everyone. We are thrilled that you have been enjoying our videos. Your support means the world to us. If you've liked what you've seen, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. We would love to hear which one of our videos is your favorite. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 members in the SSG family, and with your help, we can achieve that goal. Thank you for being a part of our journey.